All right, I'm going to call to order this budget overview meeting on Monday, January 26th. Roll call, please.
Salkaitis?
Here.
Folks?
Here.
Bongard?
Here.
Munn? Here. Gem?
Here.
Spellman? Here. Petrola?
Here.
Warble?
Here.
Besner?
Here.
Weber?
Here. All right, well, good evening, everybody. We're going to get right into it. Item number 3, budget presentation. Turn it over to Bill and Heather.
I'm just going to make a couple brief opening remarks. One, Bill and I think, have been working to solicit feedback from council, not just this year, but in past years, of information that you've been looking for. So what you're going to see here tonight is an overview of the information that we believe council has been asking for. We are still open to that feedback if there's something either missing or something that you would like included in future years. But I know Bill has been working really hard to try to capture all of that in documents that will paint the picture of where our fiscal health and our trends currently are. So as we get into the specific budgets, we will have multiple workshops this year, including department overviews, capital, as we standardly do, and then utility discussions as well. But as we're going through this, if there are any questions, please stop us and ask those so that you have a comprehensive understanding. Tonight's presentations are not designed to make any big picture decisions, but more lay the foundation and set the stage for the decisions as we go through the next few workshops, as we enter into items such as capital and those utility rates. So this is intended to be a discussion tonight and a back and forth. So if there's something that you would like to know or something that you have questions on, like I said, please stop us. All the directors are here as well to answer any questions about their specific budgets. So with that, I will turn it over to Bill.
All right, thank you, Heather. Thank you, everyone, for making this workshop tonight. As Heather said, this is the first discussion about some of the key budgetary challenges facing the city, and as well as an overview of some information that was requested to be included tonight. I'm going to start with kind of just if I can, there we go. Wanted to start tonight with just an overview of the budget process and calendar and where we're at. So as you've heard me talk before and Heather talk before, budgeting isn't something that occurs only between January and April. It's something myself, all the department directors are involved in year-round. But there are pieces of it that do formally begin in October. So that's when a lot of the departments started taking a lot of information they've gathered throughout the year, different plans and studies, and working that into potential operating and capital budget requests. So tonight's meeting is this initial workshop, January 26th. We have 2 additional workshops scheduled right now, February 9th and February 23rd. So tonight, rather than try and get through a lot of information at a high level, we're going to focus on just a couple of key areas, knowing that we're going to have other discussions down the road to follow up with the information presented tonight and talk more specifics further. March 2nd and March 16th, those are City Council Committee of the Whole dates. One thing I highlighted that I wanted to just note is that we are planning to issue and develop a draft budget by March 10th. So if there are some things that require some sort of direction or consensus from the City Council, at some point prior to that, we would kind of need to know what that is so we can actually develop that draft budget for discussion and then actually discuss the draft budget at that Committee of the Whole meeting, March 16th. Moving on from then, we would have our official budget public hearing on April 6th and final budget approval April 20th. That is really the last date to formally approve a budget for the city, since we have to have a budget enacted before the beginning of the fiscal year. So as Heather alluded, there's some very specific topics we want to cover tonight. One, we're going to cover general fund actual expenditure history by department and division. There are some additional charts that we developed over the last few days to help kind of give some context to those and help frame some of that discussion. So before we get into those specifics, we'll go over a few charts so that you have some additional information prior to that discussion. We want to talk very briefly about the city's overall bond rating and the overall amount of outstanding general obligation debt and IEP loans. We're also going to be talking about the currently existing lead service line replacement unfunded mandate and how the city needs to move forward with that. And we're also going to be talking about an update of the utility rate study governing electric, water, and sewer. So as Heather said, we're not asking for any final direction or final decisions tonight. This is meant to start a discussion on these topics with further discussion at upcoming meetings. But certainly if there is feedback, we're happy to hear that and would welcome that. One thing I wanted to note is that one of our initiatives many months ago was to develop a budget and brief document. So I don't think he's here yet, but my new Deputy Director, Roy Beckham, has been working on this for the last essentially 6 months, and he developed a draft document that we have been collaborating on. And working with the city's communications division closely, we came up with a lot of, we think, are good graphics to try and convey the city's overall budget message and story. So we appreciate any feedback on this. I just wanted to mention it tonight since we were talking about budget. Our goal is to put this on the website and have it available for anyone to download. But further from that, after we finish the upcoming fiscal year budget, we would look to more widely disseminate that to help tell the city's overall budget story about revenues and expenses and where the budget and where the money goes.
Before Bill moves on to, I do just want to emphasize how much time went into this and trying to make this a digestible document for the public. So if everybody can take a look at this, the larger image went out in the emails that Bill sent last week, but please take a look at this and give us any feedback you have if there's any information that you think is missing, but it gives some of those broader pictures of how our funds are spent and what projects were spent in any given fiscal year that we're hoping translates well to the public.
So moving on to the discussion about departmental expenditures in the general fund, this was sort of a last-minute request to add a very brief overview of the revenues that the city receives in the general fund, broken down by sales taxes, property taxes, and then all the other revenue sources combined. So this provides sort of that revenue context over a 5-year period for sales taxes and property taxes that the city receives. As you can see, for last fiscal year, all those other revenues and other sources combined were just under $67 million. I'm going to try and take lots of pauses here and there to make sure I'm not just rushing to the next slide. So if there's any questions, just let me know.
I have a question.
Yes.
The other revenue sources, are there details on, or where we get to that in future meetings, like hotel motel tax? Is that kind of what you're talking? Is that where that falls into? Okay. This isn't
normally at this meeting we would talk about those very specific revenue sources and how they're doing and what our projections are. That's not for tonight. We're not planning on doing that. This was meant to provide just the broad context about generally where the revenues come from.
Okay, thank you.
No, just also generally, we're talking about property taxes and the levy. We've seen that it continues to go up. So that's not only new houses and new properties to levy, but also that's where the increase comes in as well, correct?
Correct. It's the increases in the levy. Usually it's been, 2.5%, 3%, 4%. That's what's driving those levy increases.
And to play off that, that's pretty consistent. I mean, I know that's not flat, but that looks like a straight line, and it's just going to be the next 5 years you foresee that to just kind of maintain that.
Yeah, I think going back to the levy discussions we had, I think in order to stay structurally sound, the city would be looking to do some moderate tax levy increases on an annual basis just to keep pace with the other expenses in the fund.
Gotcha.
But if it was zero, and I know you have a lot to do, but if it was zeroed out, we would expect it to stay flat, or would new construction continue to? So it would stay flat if we don't actually increase the levy to account for that new construction. So new construction is only a benefit to city if we actually increase the levy to realize that additional growth, and that additional increase in the levy is spread amongst the new construction that's occurred within the community.
So maybe, Mayor, just another way to answer that too is when we do our levy every year, we set it at a dollar amount, not a percentage. So if we set it at $15 million, it stays that regardless of the number of properties it's across.
Yeah. And to clarify too, this is all property taxes received in the general fund. So this would include a couple of SSAs that are also levied by the city on an annual basis and are recorded in this fund, including SSA 1A and SSA 1B. And then if there were any other random disbursements related to levy collections. Okay. So when we start talking about expenditures, we wanted to frame it in terms of what are the total general fund expenditures and transfers out of the general fund. So the blue line is the total expenditures plus transfers out for various purposes. And those transfers out are in that orange line next to each fiscal year. So we wanted to take this little moment to just go over what those transfers out have been before we kind of get into the composition and the mix of expenditures separate from those. So I'm going to pull those out going forward in the discussion, but I just wanted to take the time to, mention those and list those here. Some of them, we've talked about many times, like the city's transfers out for debt purposes. So when the city has issued general obligation bonds in the past for general capital projects, the city has funded those repayments through a transfer out of the general fund. So one thing I just wanted to note here is that those transfers have gone down from $5.8 million to $5.4 million last year because we started actually paying off some of these older bond issuances that we no longer have a principal or interest repayment for. So that frees up just that much more additional money as we do that in the general fund for other purposes and can help keep, other taxes and fees lower by doing that. Yes.
Is it the bonds are 22, 23, a little higher, or is that why that's a little bit higher?
That's just a reflection of what those actual principal and interest payments happen to be for certain bond issuance at the time in total. And it could be that back then there was the last issuance the city did for new money was 2021. So those we might have had some deferred interest payments. Some of those initial bond payments for the 21 issue occurred in 22, 23.
That makes sense. Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Can you go back to the previous slide?
Yep.
This might be for Derek in the back, shared. So for sales and use taxes, do we track the actual, like the number of units or something that are actually being sold? I know that the dollar amount's going up, but I would suspect, right, that we're not selling more X, or we don't have more, consumers coming in. It's just the rate of which things cost are more expensive, and the taxes that you would get from a hamburger in 2020 that would cost X is now here. So it's not as if you've got more people coming to St. Charles to buy X, Y, Z. It's just that it costs more and you're getting more tax revenue out of it, but it's not that you're actually doing more, getting more. Is that a fair assumption? I know, again, now you're pulling into the private sector a little bit, but the reality of our sales taxes, this revenue source keeps jumping, but we're not the one making the widgets, but the reality is what it costs a consumer to come to St. Charles to eat at a restaurant or buy a vehicle. They're not selling more of those, they're just taking in more. So it's a little bit of I would say, careful of what you're projecting those revenues, because the minute they buy fewer Chevys or the minute they do X, that number is going to drop because they're not, it's a volume versus, is that a fair assumption, or am I looking at it the wrong way?
There's probably a couple different things going on. I'm not going to comment on whether the number of people shopping in St. Charles has increased. I think that's likely. We've had a lot of new businesses open up over the last few years, auto dealerships and lots of other things. So I'm guessing, Derek would probably agree that there's some general increase in foot traffic. There is some of that is an increase in price of those goods being sold, without a doubt. Remember too, the city is receiving sales tax on internet and out-of-state purchases. So actually, Amazon is, I think, one of the top 10, sales tax generating businesses for the city because of all those out-of-state purchases, because of the law changes the state enacted for the Leveling the Playing Field Act. And so the cities have seen an increase in those revenues coming into the city as well. So it's no longer just about what occurs in St. Charles, it's about what's being ordered from St. Charles and delivering to those residents in St. Charles. Yeah.
Right, but what Alderman Bongard is asserting is that we haven't sold more or had more foot traffic. We've just increased prices $10 million worth. And I just refuse to believe that. That seems absurd. In 5 years, things have gone up that in such a way that we have raked in $10 million more in revenue, in tax revenue, and that seems absurd to me in 5 years. I've seen openings of many different businesses. We've had car dealerships open. So I guess my question is what he said accurate, or can we say that there has been a boom in business in 5 years in St. Charles that has increased this revenue? Because I heard you agree with him, but I don't.
I think it's
I don't
a little
see
bit
how...
of. I think it's a little bit of everything.
Okay.
I think it's a little bit of more people shopping in St. Charles. I think it's the price of things going up. I think it's new businesses opening in St. Charles. I think it's probably some combination of all of those things, as well as the out-of-state purchases, coming in. So there's a variety of things there that I think are contributing to that.
So it's not just an increase in prices; it is also an increase in sales.
I would think so, yeah.
So Alderperson Monza, we don't actually track exactly to your point the things that we're collecting on sales tax. It's just the dollar amounts that come in. So certainly we see that there's inflation in pricing, but beyond us receiving those sales tax receipts, we're not seeing what that's being spent on. So if we had a Best Buy and 10 people bought 10 TVs at a higher threshold, that's probably not going to answer the question that Alderman Bongard is asking about, what are those dollars coming from and how are they coming in? But we just receive the dollars, so no way to track that specifically.
But we do know how many businesses we have.
Correct. And to your point, exactly, we've had additional car dealerships open up, so we could track year over year a specific business and see how their sales tax proceeds are actually producing versus saying comprehensively we can't tell. But yes, we could look at individual businesses and see there are more businesses that are producing sales tax to the city.
But I mean, I've been on council as other people are, 2021 fiscal year to 2022, 2023, boy, that was tough to get out. And you look at the jumps in sales tax, yes, we've had new businesses open, but I'm going to venture to guess we didn't have 5 new car dealerships open in 2 years that generated $7 million in net revenue there.
Yeah.
So maybe the point is that's helpful from a projection understanding. Is like that tax that gets the fairness, that's a good reminder of how these numbers and what's factored into that.
Yeah, there's a lot of things I think have gone into that. And keep in mind too, these numbers are gross. Some of the new car dealerships, we're currently rebating that sales tax back to them. And so that actually shows up in Derek's budget under contractual services. So I think the number is a couple million, $2.5 million is what we're currently rebating to different businesses for their sales tax agreements. So some of the increase you're seeing is being rebated on the other side of the ledger right now.
We have a couple of questions over here. We had Brian and then David.
Yeah. Just to kind of remind everyone, we did have COVID during those couple of years, and hotel motel tax was down significantly. Liquor tax was down significantly. Yep. So I think some of that bump up is a result of just more businesses opening up and yep. more customers coming up. But those are great points, but I forgot about that as well, but I think that played a big role in the difference there.
David?
More a comment, kind of dovetailing with Jamie was mentioning too. I mean, I'm sure it is hard. We don't, and not to put Derek on the spot, I mean, you do talk to businesses, you get an idea of how they're doing. I would anecdotally suggest just kind of down the same route that we're doing better in terms of attracting more people here. If not, I mean, I'm sure the Business Alliance would be quite disappointed in that, because isn't that what they want for our city? But I mean, you do talk to businesses. I mean, generally we're up, right?
Yeah, I mean, I do talk to a lot of businesses. I mean, we've got over 2,000 businesses here, so it's hard to determine from that, but I do get a little bit of anecdotal information. But I think, Ryan and Jamie, they do bring up a good point. There's been a lot of inflation over the past 5 years, but also with COVID, that certainly factors into it. But this is why Placer is also important, because that does show foot traffic. Mm-hmm. So we do go in and we do look at grocery stores, Walmart, these type of places, and see what the foot traffic is showing. That doesn't show 100% clear picture either, but it is another metric that is useful in determining whether we're seeing an increase in volume in St. Charles.
All right. So Yeah, so the transfers out, we talked about the debt. We have transfer money out of the debt general fund to help fund general capital projects. You can see that line over the last 5 years. We have also subsidized the water fund, as we've talked about several different meetings. There's been a lot of critical projects that need to get done in the water fund, a lot of increases in operating costs, capital costs, and some of those needed to be subsidized by the general fund. So just wanted to cover that piece of it, so you know that that's always part of the discussion when we're looking at the general fund. It's not just about expenditures, it's about where else do we need to transfer money for what purpose that would also help some other objective of the city.
Is there,
yeah.
What falls under transfers other?
So we set aside funds for equipment replacement. That's another transfer out. On the IT perspective, also, I believe there's transfers out for a couple other small purpose funds. Oh, like the refuse fund, we subsidized the spring cleanup by $105,000 a year. So there's a couple other minor things that are in that line item.
Because it's really gone down significantly, it seems to me. I mean, from where it was in 2021 at least. I just wondered kind of what was in it.
Mm-hmm. And part of it too is we did the last few years had a couple opportunities where we closed a fund because we no longer needed it. So some of those surplus monies when we closed the fund came back to the general fund, and that's how we were able to transfer more money out of the general fund for, say, capital purposes or other purposes. We haven't had that happen significantly in the last year or so, but some of those examples include when the police station project was done, there was about $1.8 million left in that fund, and so that was transferred back to the general fund, and then that money was then either transferred for capital projects or whatever additional purpose there might have been that specific year, if there was a purpose. But we've had those, we call them like one-time revenue sources. We've talked about that. Those are sort of one-time influxes of revenue into the general fund, and that enabled us to do some of those transfers out partially. So we can't really, obviously we can't rely on that. You know, we've kind of closed the obvious things we no longer needed to have for various reasons, and we don't have any, pot sitting out there waiting to bring back into the general fund that might help effectuate some of those transfers. Yes.
Back to when I mentioned 22-23, your original answer, I see that obviously the First Street Plaza transfer and contributed to that. That was paid for, correct, from some surpluses that we were able to secure. And
it's like I just said, it was a combination of, that might have been one of the year where we closed. We used to have a self-health insurance fund, and that might have been the year we closed that, consolidated it back into the general fund, and that helped us enable to make that transfer. Okay. So this is again, general broad context chart that we included before we get into the individual departments, showing the 4 categories of personnel services, commodities, contractual, and other capital. So one of the things we wanted to do was kind of break down those categories, but then also just show an example of what some of these year-over-year changes could be. And I think fiscal 23-24 seemed to be a good example. In that specific year, there was a $3.3 million increase in personnel costs over the prior year. In looking at the actual detail behind it, what drove a lot of that was a $1.8 million increase in city, police, and fire pension contributions. And for those of you on the council may recall, a few years ago, we made an additional contribution to the police and fire pension fund to help fund those pension systems to the tune of about $1.355 million that year. Those contributions show up as an expense in the appropriate police and fire budgets. So those types of things, it was a good example of how things can be skewed one way or the other based on these sort of unique transactions that might happen during the year. And if you break out, say, a $500,000 increase in health insurance costs for that year, an overall increase in personnel costs was 9.3%, but when you get down to it, the actual increase in wages and salaries was about 3.9%. So it just seemed a good example to illustrate the fact that there's a lot of kind of deeper digging we need to do in some of these sometimes that can kind of skew what those percent increases are on a year-over-year basis. Yes.
Commodities again, just refreshing my memory. We're talking about salt and stuff, things like that.
Salt, materials. I actually have a list I can pull out.
That's fine. I was just curious.
Yeah.
And then, I had asked the same question earlier. So here's the list that make up commodities, and
thank you.
It's just about everything else that doesn't fit in the category.
When I hear commodity, I think like grain and
you're
stuff.
Right.
It's all our supplies. It's the supplies, the things that we have to use to do the work.
Yeah.
No, good question. So if you want it, here's the.
I'll take it. Thank you.
Yeah, sure can.
Is that it's all day?
Yeah, that was it. Sorry. Thank you.
Okay.
Sorry, Bill.
You're fine.
Bill, I just had a quick question. Going back to and I don't want to get dug in the weeds on it, but the pension. So is that a constant number? Or is that going to fluctuate up and down? I know we're trying to, eat into that over time, but.
No, that's good. So every year, at the end of our fiscal year, we have our actuarial consultant do evaluation of the police and fire pension funds.
Mm-hmm.
That valuation with the, existing parameters in terms of funding goals and number of years left returns to us what we need to contribute to that fund for the upcoming fiscal year. So that number that we get from the actuary will ultimately drive what we need to levy for police and fire with the tax levy process the upcoming December. So we typically get the valuation done in July, and then that information is included in our annual audit as of 4/30. So all the numbers about debt pension liabilities, required contributions, all the actuarial terminology and indicators are included in the audit, but those become the key sort of base components of the upcoming tax levy discussion.
But those funds then, they affect the structure of the budget, right?
Yes, they do. They're an expense in the police and fire pension budget, and that's per accounting rules that have been around for probably 20 years now.
And then going back to you did a sheet on what we could show to the residents. Do you think there's a point in just marking a pension fund on there that's what is part of our budget?
I think that's a great
because believe it or
suggestion.
not, as long as I've been here, I'm still trying to put my arms around how we pay that out, how it affects our budget overall, et cetera, et cetera. So, and I'm not saying we have to give all the information in the world, but that might be something that seems friendly.
Yeah.
If there's a way to put that out to the public or the residents.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Thanks.
Thank you.
Is the annual allocation for pensions likely to be similar every year, or are we, and I'm catching up, are we catching up in some manner, or are they always going to be in this general neighborhood and going up from there?
Yeah, and that's information we can have at the next budget, workshop and discussion about those actual charts and our progress in funding. We are making progress on both police and fire pension side. I believe fire is around 71%, police is over 60 now. So they both have the goal of 2040, 100% funding goal.
So it'll taper off at some point?
It'll and this is a great discussion. As we get closer, that's one less year to amortize the unfunded liability that's remaining. So the fewer years you have, the higher that ramp could get based on your other funding parameters. So that's actually something we're taking a look at probably over the next several months in terms of how do we lower that ramp a little bit, and how do we manage some of those assumptions to maybe pay a little bit more now so that ramp isn't as difficult as we get closer to that funding deadline.
And Bill, that's because statutorily we're mandated by, is it by 2040 or 2035 to reach those funding levels? 2040
is the deadline.
So there was a statute that's not.
Yeah.
I mean, it's always going to be a good practice, but statutorily we have that deadline, which has been the reason that us and other municipalities have had to increase the contribution in order to do it, because in the past it was just deferred, or moved on, and now that's not an option.
And we're
going to see the greater percentage continuing to increase.
Correct.
I think it's 90% funded by 2042, but it's a high threshold that we have to get to by that year.
Yeah, so we've always adopted the 100% funding goal, which is sound accounting, actuarial methodology. This is good conversation for later on. I'm going to mention about our bond rating and liabilities, but the pension, Moody's and a lot of the bond rating agencies have their own methodology as far as what they think your pension liabilities are. So they use their own metrics to recalculate those liabilities, and their approach is to say, it should be X after, so many years, and what that sort of tread water is a terminology they use. What's your tread water contribution? Are you maintaining that? Are you above it? Are you below it? So regardless of what the state does, Moody's, S&P, they all have their own rating methodology about how to look at our existing pension liabilities and how they look at those in comparison to our existing bond ratings. So regardless of what, the state has out there as far as, deadlines and different things, there are a lot of other metrics out there and agencies that look at it in their own unique way to assess what they think is the fiscal status and strengths of the city.
And the last thing on a side note is we continue to get updates about potential pension amendments. For instance, them getting rid of Tier 2 and everyone going back to Tier 1. Yeah. If that was, and we've heard that that's been a bill that's been in Springfield, and there's been a lot of witness slips, but if that was to occur, that significantly changes our pension liability.
Yeah.
Detrimentally in a horrible way.
Yes. Okay. So another context chart that we wanted to provide was a summary of inflation history over the last 5 years. And we did this both for the general CPI-U index used to calculate property tax limitations for non-home rule cities and then all the other districts, as well as the Chicago Neighborhood Elgin Index. And they both essentially convey basically the same story, that, inflation has been something that's really been driving a lot of costs for all municipalities over the last, several years. And sometimes that inflation takes a year or two to really, make its way into some of the cost considerations that all cities and villages are dealing with. So we wanted to, since we're looking at a 5-year history, we wanted to provide a 5-year sort of outline of what that CPI has been over the last several years, just as a reminder. One other thing we wanted to do was then sort of drill down a little bit to those categories that we had. Personnel services as a percentage of all costs for all departments combined is roughly 70%. But when you look at each department on an individual basis, it is somewhat different. So police, fire, they are heavy, almost predominantly personnel, staffing. That's what drives those budgets. As you work down each department will have its own different mix of contractual services, commodities, and personnel costs. So as we walk through each one of these, we need to kind of reference back to this, we can, but just wanted to put that out there for context as well.
I feel like we got to give Derek a little bit more than 5%.
Yeah. Unfortunately, like I mentioned earlier, Derek gets all the sales tax rebates and the alliance funding out of his budget. So that's going to skew his down to a low number.
Bill, if I can just make one comment too. I realize looking at this chart may feel a little bit personnel heavy in the city, but I want to remind everybody that what we do as a city is provide services. What we do is provide people to provide services to our residents for the most part. I mean, we do have departments like Public Works that's doing our water, our streets, and things like that. But for the most part, police, fire, those people are the service that we provide. So I just want to make sure that that context of that 85% doesn't get lost, and that's exactly what we're supposed to be doing as a city.
And I'd love to actually build on that, Heather, because I remember when I was onboarding, and I can't remember if it was you or maybe Jen's group who said that the number of personnel that we've hired in the city hasn't changed very much compared to our population at all. Our population's grown much faster than our staff, so it seems to me that we've done a very good job of restraining personnel costs.
Not to strike fear in Russ's heart or anything. I'm just curious, like, so community development and public works. Like, public works is so much. I mean, public works has the largest, literally the most humans employed but their percentage is lower than. So I'm just curious, not to get into the weeds, but I'm just like. Why? Why is that?
Yeah, so when we're talking about public works here, we're only talking about the public services division and then public works administration and engineering. We're not talking about electric, water, sewer, or utilities. So this focus is strictly on general fund personnel.
Got it, okay.
So I've got a chart upcoming that kind of shows.
Again, I'm not thinking we need to cut you or anything.
No, but
I'm just curious.
So I think this is probably important to the point that I just made. So Russ's department employs people who do plan review, who do building and code inspection. They're not using money to actually do things in the city besides their services that we're offering. So all of those departments that you see with that 86%, 85%, is because we are providing the service, whereas public works is spending more hard costs in supplies, in snow plows.
Contractors and things.
So they're doing things that are actually probably more under that commodities branch than the personnel services.
Well, and there's a consultant section as well, which I assume Peter is a lot of that. Peter's group is a lot of that as well.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that makes sense. I just wanted to drill down a little bit into that. Thank you.
No, that's a good question. And I think this is the last one that I have, but to the point that you just mentioned about staffing. So this is a chart that's in our existing budget document right now. It's online. And this just shows those authorized staffing levels over a 4-year period, ending with the current fiscal year 25-26. So you can see this is the broken down by general fund, and then we have those, like I just mentioned, Alderman Petrola, those 4 other areas where the staffing is allocated for those other purposes. So this shows the total staffing being 214 back in 22-23 to just over 217 full-time equivalents in the existing fiscal year. And full-time equivalents, that's FTE. So if you don't know, if someone works 20 hours a week, they're considered 0.5 FTE, or half of a full-time employee. So we do that rather than counting the number of employees, so it doesn't skew those numbers.
And I just want to make a clarification that Jen just pointed out. Those are authorized positions. That doesn't mean those are always full at any given time either.
I got a question, excuse me. Where does the city council fit in these numbers?
So they're not considered in this chart an FTE, I guess, but yeah, they're just, they're not in the chart. I forgot about you.
So we don't exist.
No, you do. We know you exist.
So it's not in this particular graph, but I got your point.
So where does the money come from to pay us?
Your stipends are budgeted for in the, and we'll get to that a little bit, the city officials budget.
Okay.
So one of the things we did last year is we had a lot of disparate, confusing areas where we had a city treasurer budget, we had a city clerk, we had, mayor, and so we consolidated all those things into a city officials budget. And then since I'm talking about that right now, we also consolidated a lot of the outside funding from different places into that budget as well. So it's all in one place and it's easy to identify and look at.
Thank you.
And that takes us to the first couple of division department budgets, starting off with city admin and city communications. This is the actual expenditures for the last 5 years. $635,000 last fiscal year for city administration, and $352,000 for communication, community, and public affairs. So,
I have a question.
Yes.
As you go along with this, could you explain the spikes so I have an understanding of why it's up 22% or why 80%? Just to clarify.
I'll do the best job I can, but I think each department director here is going to be able to also explain.
Perfect.
And I want to preface this too, this is something that we put together, fairly quickly in the middle of last week. So if there's some questions that we don't have an immediate answer for, we'll definitely make a list of what those are and then get back to you next time. So I don't really have a set format on how we want to kind of talk about these individual accounting units, so if anyone has a specific question, you can fire away.
Well, that is my question. As I looked at, for example, city administration, I noticed that pattern that 2021, 22, it went up 21 and a half, then it went down 25, then it went up 2, then it went up 22. Trying to understand the wild swings.
The extent of the spikes in there are the 21-22 was a payout to former city administrator Mark Keenan for cash out of his vacation and sick time. So that's the one spike you see in that 21-22 fiscal year. And then the other 2 spikes are from bringing on staffing from both Kara in communications and then bringing on Brianna as our management analyst. So those are the 3 changes that occurred in any of those budgets. Okay. Other than that, the limit, I mean, sometimes it looks a little bit in my budget like there are large percentage changes, but when you look at the actual dollar amounts, we're going from like 5,000 to 11,000 because of a project we did. So they're small dollar amounts, but if there's any questions on any of those percentage deviations, I can answer those too.
Yeah.
So Brianna's I thought she was under community development.
So she is a split position essentially between economic development and city administration. So we both share that. Derek has supervisory management over her, but she's in that budget.
And her actual wage and benefit costs are under administration budget, but she does split time and help
right, because she does permits or like liquor licenses and things like that.
Right. So, correct. Yeah. Okay. So I'll move on to the next one. We can always jump back if someone thinks of something. This is that city officials budget that I alluded to a few minutes ago. So Alderman Sakaitis, this is where the mayor and alderpersons stipends are budgeted for in personnel services. Personnel services also includes some memberships within each department, including this. So IML, Metro West, those types of things are classified as an associated personnel expense. So that's why they're in those line items as well.
Can you tell us what some of the costs that went up in those, or it sounds like some things got consolidated maybe that, wouldn't be apples to apples maybe? I don't know, I'm just curious because it seems like, like our costs are flat.
Yeah. So on the personnel side or a different line?
All around, because it went from 933 to over $1 million. So I'm just curious in total, what was it that went up?
Sure. A variety of things. So like I said, we consolidated for this budget those fundings for outside organizations. So those are in the contractual services line item. So the Visitors Cultural Commission, Youth Commission, the Mental Health Board funding, all those things have either stayed flat or gone up the last 5 years, either once or maybe a few different times. So that's the main driver for the increase in contractual services, is those outside funding amounts are now in that city officials budget. Those fall
under city officials. That's interesting. Why
What's
is that? Why do those fall under city officials?
Honestly, that was the best place that we felt we could organize those things into one specific budget, so they were all in one place, and city officials seemed to make the most sense to do that.
Okay.
So the Mental Health Board levy, it's a levy we levy every year as part of the tax levy. The expense where that money is then doled out by the Mental Health Board after approval by City Council, that actual expense is an expense in that budget.
That makes sense. Okay. Thank you.
Bill, does that mean because we voted on them?
Yeah.
Just for those particular ones? Is that what you're saying? Or you just, it's the best place to put them?
It's not unusual to have sort of outside, from my experience, have outside funding for different groups or commissions be part of the legislative city officials budget. So because we were trying to consolidate it, it made a lot more sense than trying to, before they were parceled off in different areas in their own accounting units, and it was frankly really confusing. And we thought it'd be a much better presentation, especially when you look at that budget and you see the different accounts, you can actually see the history of all those in one place versus having to go to 4 or 5 different places in the budget to see those.
I just want to make sure it doesn't appear that we are spending this money.
No.
When you see $900,000 in that line item.
Yeah.
And to that point, I think that when we produce our actual draft budget, what you see is actually these detail sheets in there that are fully accessible to the public. I think for this purpose, this is not what it looks like to the general public, if that helps.
Yeah, where's that $1 million going?
Yeah. What kind of services are you contracting up there, huh?
Right.
Yeah, so.
No, it makes a good spot to put them, Bill. That way they're all together, so that makes sense, so.
It does
especially
make,
mental health
it's not
being
spread.
Yeah. All right. Anything? So, next two budgets are information technology and human resources. Information technology, just under $3 million last year, and human resources, $1.15 million.
I guess the question in human resources, Jen, you may or not know, but just a big spike in 21, 22, and then it comes back down in line, so that shows so it's 253,000, and then it drops to 190. So there must have been an unusual contractual service in that fiscal year. Sorry.
She turned it off on me. Okay. For the personnel services, the biggest one was related to police officer candidates, new hire testing. So those are very expensive candidates. We're talking the medical exam, the polygraph, the psychological. And unfortunately, as we go through some of those, people fail out and you start all over with your next candidate. So we just had a particularly high year, and that was the personnel services. The contractual services, some of you will remember, we had hired GovHR for compensation study and the recruitment of a finance director and the recruitment of an economic development director. So those were the big cost drivers. And then also that year, under contractual services, the Board of Fire Police Commission budgeted items for testing for police and fire was collapsed into HR because we're really the ones that review the billing and pay the bills and everything. It would make more sense for us to be making sure that those bills were correct. So that was collapsed into our budget. So that was another spike.
Yeah, okay. Well, it makes sense because it's the ebb and flow based on what's happening. So great. Thank you for the history.
Alderman Person Bunkard.
So just for information technology, I know we've had a lot of work that had to be done in the last, 4+ years with, websites and systems and bringing that all to, where we needed it to be. Larry, do you anticipate, the trajectory that you see here for the last 5 years to continue, or do you think it's going to, we've kind of caught up for all the things we have to do and, we'll be on schedule? Or do you anticipate this kind of constant having to?
I think it's going to be a regular growth like you're seeing. As we transition to more cloud-hosted services, those will show up in our budget. So, for example, like 2 years ago when we brought the new utility billing system online, that was both new software as well as hosting services that we didn't have before. So we're going to gradually see more of that. It'll be, I think, a gradual growth. It won't be all at one-time growth, but it will continue to be a growth.
Okay.
Okay. Any other questions on IT, human resources? Next up is finance. We have two divisions in finance, one finance accounting and 4 utility billing. We have just under $1.5 million in total expenditures on the accounting side and $680,000 on utility billing. Overall, the finance department is 13 full-time equivalent employees, just 5 in utility billing and 8 in finance and accounting.
What happened in 21, 22? A little dip.
Got my notes.
Oh, okay.
In 21, 22 for which division?
Oh, for accounting, it went to negative 10.
Negative 10. So 21, 22, we had a vacancy in the director position for many months.
That's right.
And then that position was filled in January of 2022, I'm glad to say.
That's good. That's a reminder.
Yeah.
Bill, without tooting your horn here, does this mean these two departments are running fairly efficiently?
Fairly consistently, I'd say, yeah. I think we've had very, very minor changes in staffing, converting a part-time to a full-time position, some restructuring of positions. So when we've had a vacancy, we've sort of assessed it and then, retooled it to meet more urgent needs. I'm happy to talk about, some of the expenditure category classifications, like, contractual services those are our auditing services, banking charges, the finances portion of the ERP system that we have with Lawson. That's roughly $100,000. Actuarial services that we talked about, those are budgeted out of there as well.
And those trends tend to go down or stay flat?
Yeah, I'm not anticipating any significant changes on our end. So overall, it's going to be pretty, steady as she goes. I think there's some things that we're looking at from a budgeting and, ERP perspective that will impact, a variety of budgets, including ours, Larry's, and others down the road. But those are some things that are, to be seen.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Yep.
Bill, just curious if going to the online systems for utility billing or making that available to residents, did that help save money at all?
Yeah, that's a good question. We have had people, I don't have the numbers with me, but, opt out of paper bills, so there is some, savings on the postage and printing side of that. That's roughly, I actually have that here, that's roughly about $90,000 a year for printing and postage of utility bills.
Nice.
We have banking lockbox services, so when people mail their payments into the lockbox, the bank charges us a fee for that, so that's about $30,000 a year out of utility billing for banking services. So, any other questions? The next is the fire department. Fire is broken up into 3 different accounting units: administration, operations, and we have a separate EMA division as well. One thing I wanted to note, based on how we budgeted those pension costs we talked about, where we get that actuarial evaluation done every year, and then we made that additional contribution in 23-24. You can see that shows up in the fire admin personnel line item. So you can see that increase from $3.9 million to $4.9 million. That's largely due to the increased city contributions to the pension fund in that year. So that entire amount flows through that admin budget.
Bill, is there any, just from a public perception view, if someone doesn't have that explanation and they're just going through, it seems like such a spike, when in actuality it's a really good thing for city finance. So is there ever any asterisk or any, anything? I think the question's already been asked. It just seems like it's such an important, that doesn't tell the story. That looks like costs are up, when in fact that was a great decision by the city long term.
Right. It was a good decision, and I think for certainly if we had more time to kind of walk through each one of these and highlight a lot of the year-over-year changes, that would be a good document to have.
Bill, correct me if I'm wrong, but when we actually produce that year's budget, we do a cover sheet in each of the budgets that we present. Wasn't that delineated in that narrative on that particular item?
It may. So we do a department division summary in the budget. So it describes each accounting unit. It shows accomplishments, goals, and objectives, and gives some good narrative information about each one of these. And that's in the existing budget that's been online for a few years now.
So as we pass this year's budget, this number wouldn't show up at all in there. But if you go back to that year's budget, it outlines that in a narrative form, just in it's less than a page on the front of each budget.
You can't anticipate or predict anything, but we have people who are very active, who come in and public comments and make comments about our finances and our
Sure.
budget. Again, that's a win for the city.
It is, and if we pulled that budget year's approved budget, that narrative is in there that says we made that additional contribution, and it's in a more digestible narrative than just the number.
Could I kind of tag in onto what the mayor mentioned too? But this, for instance, this line graph is not, I mean, it's being shown now and we're discussing it. This isn't going to be static on, I think that's what the mayor might be asking, is somebody looks at that online, but this won't be public, correct? This little bar graph?
No, I mean, this isn't.
Other than just us.
Other than discussing it right now, this isn't public.
I was thinking, yeah, something like that if there was an asterisk on, but if that's not going to be shown, then I guess that's, yeah.
Right, you want to have some context and explanation.
Right. And to that point too, I think it's, when we do that budget and brief document, if we do additional contributions like that, that's certainly something we could call out on that graphic. Because we're trying to call out the things that, one, matter to the public, and two, may cause those questions. So that's a perfect example of what we would put into there.
And I think even just, Jamie, I'm going to point out a conversation we had when you were talking about the importance of policy and one-time expenditures and different things. And again, I just keep going back to that. That's something to be really proud of. And so on that end, highlighting that, I think is important. The one-time expenditure that's to benefit the city more.
I mean, especially if we, like, when I had the question I asked you about your role, there was this spike and then you were hired, like, that's 100% an appropriate, expenditure, and just highlighting that is important.
Yeah. And that's why in our annual audit and ACFR, we do try and articulate those, significant changes year over year, so that, that there is some context with those things. Okay. Any other questions on fire? This is police. Again, mostly personnel costs. I believe they have 60 total sworn 60 sworn total throughout the police department, and just under 18 million total last actual year.
Is some of that increase due to the body cam expenditure as well?
There are some costs associated with the body-worn cameras, and that shows up in the other capital line item. The city did get a grant from DOJ for a good portion of that. So you would see that on this side of it, but you'd see that on the grant revenue side of our ledger.
Can you explain the increase in contractual services? What is, you go from 1.3 to 1.6? What is that? Is that a one-time?
That, Brian, is the body-worn camera.
Is that the, okay.
And the in-car cameras that we did, that were mandated for 2025, January of 2025.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So we can certainly come back if there's anything else, but, sorry? Okay. So the next one is Public Works. So in the general fund, there are two accounting units related to Public Works services, one for administration and engineering, and the other for public services. I think as we alluded to earlier, when we were looking at that chart of personnel expenditures, by department, public services is the one that is, more heavy than our departments for contractual services and providing those certain types of services to the public. So, anything on PW? Okay. Community development has three accounting units, planning services, building and code, and development engineering. And between all three, it's roughly about $2.2 million.
So, Bill, with studies, does that go into planning or development engineering?
What type of study would you be?
I guess whenever we're looking at a development or, traffic studies or,
Yeah, I'm going to defer to Russ on that because sometimes it might pop up in his budget or maybe Derek, so.
If it's something that's engineering related, that would be under the Development Engineering Accounting Unit. And it's under contractual services. And a large portion of those contractual services costs are actually reimbursable by developers. So that number fluctuates every year based on the amount of engineering assistance we need, but it's generally either reimbursed or those costs are covered pretty significantly by permit fees for engineering projects.
Okay, thank you.
Which would kind of explain, Russ, just looking at 23, 24, where in each of the three accounting units, all of the contractual services went up really high over the previous year and then dropped back down in 24, 25. So I'm guessing is there timing between when we expend our service and when we get the reimbursement from the developer?
Yeah, it's really based on the volume of development and construction activity that we see. So when when we need additional capacity, both for plan reviews or for inspections or other engineering services, those costs then appear really across the department in different areas related to construction.
Yeah, it's just funny how that one year everything was up in all three of the accounting units, and then 24, 25 it drops back down to where it looked like it was normally trending. So that's why I asked if we expend the money buying, hiring consultants, engineers, then we get the feedback from the developer. It might just be a timing thing on when we actually get reimbursed.
Yes, because the fees that we collect do not always align with when the expense was incurred.
Right.
Because sometimes it's something that's billed later or that's reconciled at the end of a project.
Yep. So we finish up on one fiscal year, we get the check back from the developer. The following fiscal year, they're not going to match up. So great, thank you.
And I think that spike was related to the larger east side projects and all of the engineering and initial permitting happening at the same time. So the Charlestown Lakes and the Springs projects.
Thank you, Russ.
I think Russ's budget is also a good time to point out how it's incredibly complex to capture all of our costs and expenditures in these type of charts and breakdowns, because you can see contractual services and planning and see $3.3 million and think, what are they spending that money on? But not understanding there's a counter line item for a revenue stream that comes in to offset that from the developers. So while I wish there was a way that we could capture all of those complexities in an easy to digest format, the best we can do with some of these narratives, but we're always happy to explain so that everybody has a better understanding and picture of it.
The last department budget in the general fund is economic development. I think we started to talk about how a lot of the amounts in contractual services are related to economic incentive agreements for sales tax rebates. One of the things that we consolidated last year, similar to the city officials budget, was we put the alliance budget in that contractual services line item. So the amounts you see here are reflective of those that agreement as well.
Because what's the Alderman Petrillo's point is somebody saw that graph and would be asking poor Derek what he's doing all the time that his budget jumps that
Right.
big. So
Right.
It's paying all those incentives, correct, Derek?
That's right.
Thank you.
And last year we did have, in addition to, ongoing newer agreements with, like Honda and those type of larger car dealerships, Whole Foods had a lump sum reimbursement paid out of this account last year as well. So sometimes it's not even just the new ongoing rebates, it's the sort of one-time reimbursements as well. Okay. All right, that is the end of that section. I don't know, Mayor, if you wanted to take a break or just kind of move along?
You know what, I was just looking up and down, take a quick 5-minute break, bathroom break.
Or questions before?
I'm just looking through to see if anybody wants.
I'll take a break.
All right. First, before we do that, any questions?
So we're moving on, right?
Yes, unless there's something else that you wanted to talk about.
So I want to say, because Bill and I had a couple of meetings last week, I appreciate how much time and effort everybody did putting this together. I know nobody likes to sit down and start climbing into budgets, and it can be a very awkward, walk me through what you're doing with this. And it's I really, really appreciate this exercise. I know it's something that we've been talking a lot about the last 4 years. So for just me personally, I really appreciate it. I would like to know some of the conversations that we've had kind of post this report coming out about, okay, now that we've seen, some of the numbers and we're understanding we're all on the same page, where do we go from here in real time to say, here's some of the concerns, not necessarily by an individual department or a line item, but more of the larger strategic conversations. When or where are we having those?
In terms of capital expenditures, in terms of utility rates, in terms of those kind of things?
Yes and no. So I want to be very careful that I don't, and again, I'm just speaking for one of the 10. I really want to avoid getting into specifics, with a particular department and being justify A or B. What I'm more interested in is the larger strategic vision of, hey, if you look at, the subtotal by department and you look over fiscal year 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you see, a 5%, a 7%, an 11, and a 4. And where I think that we provide the greatest value is trying to put some guardrails a little bit about not trying to get into any one particular department because we're not the subject matter experts, but also recognizing the reality of, I know I've said this before about the size of the pie growing and being realistic about, here's how we're funding, this is where the revenue is coming in, but trying to understand if the rate of our expenses are growing at 3%, yeah, that seems in line with all the things that we need to do. What for me personally, it's scary is when you see a 7% and a 9% and a 6%. It's about sustainability. It's about preparing for 2, 3, 4 years down the line. And again, trying to balance that. We're not trying to pick out one particular department to be justify your expenses, but more so with all the things that we have to do and where we're trying to go. When do we have those meetings and those conversations?
So we formulate a budget based on, here's what our contractual obligations are for our personnel costs, here's what our contractual services require, here's what our capital needs are for a year, and then we present that to City Council. Now, as we present those pieces of the budget, if the question comes up of, this is too high, I don't want to spend that, that's the point at which the council could give us that feedback and say, hey, we're not going to increase the budget by X percentage. We do our job of making sure that we're providing the services that we have continued to provide based on past directions from City Council. So I guess it sort of sounds like, and correct me if I'm wrong, that if the council feels like I'm not comfortable with a 9% increase in our general fund budget this year, you guys are capped at 5%. Are you asking when we have that conversation?
Yeah, if it's that specific, that quickly.
Right, and I
sure.
want to distill it down only because as we've seen as we go through this budget, Bill did a really, really good job of capturing how our trends are in these budgets. Mm-hmm. But understand that there's a lot of our budget that I've got half my time billed to this line item and half of it over here, and when we have certain projects, it's billed out of multiple departments. So pulling one lever creates a trickle-down effect. So our estimated staff time that we put in before we present to City Council to our budget is between 3,000 and 3,500 hours collectively. So we try to make all the pieces fit based on the strategic visions of City Council, from our strategic plan, from our policy directives, and from things that have been put in place all along. And it's difficult to try to, anticipate where council may have pullback on that. So I guess at any point, as we're presenting these budget items in these chunks of, tonight we're going to focus on capital, tonight we're going to focus on director budgets, tonight we're going to focus on our utilities, it has to be sort of within the context of those three as we're presenting those numbers based on the things that we put together.
So let me ask it a different way. So if you look at, fiscal year 24, 25, you roll up the subtotal by department, it's 3.5% increase over the previous year, right? So if you were to look at the next 2 fiscal years, what is the likelihood that we are in that 3.5% range when you roll over without putting one department, under the hot lamp? What is the reality that we're going to stay in that range of about 3.5% versus, to your point of you could be at 5 because of this, or it could be at 6, but if council wants to rein it in, that's I would like to do things, I would like to take a different approach with this conversation, because I think what happens with this body is you get painted into a corner. And it's, well, if you want to do X, you can kick the can down the road, but then it's going to be, and now you start finding yourself at 5, 7, 11% increases year over year in your expense, and trying to ask the question of, if I said, Bill, we're good at 3.5%, moving this up by department, you can find a way to work all the numbers. If it's like, there's no way we can make that work based on all the things we have to do, you're looking at more of X%. I would like to take a different approach and look at this a little bit of a, I keep wanting to say different approach, but you get kind of like, can you look at your fiscal years for the next 2 years out and say, yeah, I think we'll probably be around that 3.5%, 4%, or, no, there's different conversations, because I think that, for a lot of us, is part of the missing piece of this.
So I understand what you're getting at. I think where we have a hard time as staff translating that is we put the numbers together in the budget based on the things that are already set in motion. Contracts, union contracts, purchases we have to make, and that leaves very little room for discretionary spending. So if you're talking about that discretionary spending pot, and council says as a policy, we want to increase our budget by no more than 3% in this next fiscal year. As Bill just pointed out, we have a line item out expenditure for our incentives. So that may artificially inflate our budget to look like it's a much larger percentage than it is, even though we're getting money in to offset that. So I guess that's why these specific policy directives, whether it's on how we pay our employees at a certain percentile, or some of these other decisions that we're making about capital projects become really crucial, because that's the way for us to operationally implement those policy directives versus that mandate at the end of the discussion of, nope, we're only comfortable with X percentage increase in the budget. And if that is the directive from council, then certainly we will figure out a way either to communicate why that's not possible, or to where we could make that possible. But trying to have city council start to get into the weeds on the budget itself, because like I said, we spend thousands of hours at a staff level to make these things work. So in the 6 to 10 hours we have here with council, that exercise becomes a little bit difficult. So the policy directive of we're either comfortable or we're not comfortable with a percentage increase in the budget is how we have to then formulate it.
And that makes it makes sense. So let me just ask it with closing, so do we have a projection over the next 2 fiscal years as to what that subtotal percentage is going to look like? Based on knowing all the things like lead pipe, because from my experience, you know what your contractual obligations are by pensions and payroll and this, so that stuff should be, just run an Excel spreadsheet. You can know what your costs are going to be. So some of these other unknowns, do you have a 25, 26, 26, 27, that 3.5% looks more like X before we get to your point well, if you want to introduce a new program or this, it's going to jump, but do you have that number right now?
No, we don't have any specific numbers, tonight to talk about, but I think a lot of that is such, service-driven numbers too. Calls for service, snow events, a lot of things that, can drive what those budgets wind up being. I can tell you, even on the finance side, we're given more mandates in terms of accounting and financial reporting that we have to implement every year, and a lot of it is very, very complicated and onerous and time intensive. And so I have to juggle, just from my example, from my department, how are we going to do this yet keep doing what we're doing? So we're not going to work on that this year. We're going to set that aside. So a lot of times the juggling act, even in my department, to try and get done what we need to get done, because there's constantly new mandates coming down about what the city has to do, or there's contractual agreements saying what we have to do, and just more mandates coming down in terms of how the city goes about providing services too and maintaining those service levels. So a lot of it's service level driven, I think.
And I'll add on to that too, Bill, only because, as we're talking about the size of the general fund and getting into utility lines, we're talking about supplementing our utility rates with our general fund money. So that's another expenditure that comes out, and as quickly as we tell you we predict 6% growth next year, the same way it's been in the general fund, that will be out of date tomorrow when we get another unfunded mandate. And I know that you and I talk a lot about the pie. The pie can't keep getting bigger. Unfortunately, our service level pie keeps getting bigger every single day, and we just can't keep it within the bounds of what the current revenue streams always are, because
every single day we have something come down the pipeline that we are obligated to do.
So I think this is a good question for me to ask now, because I've asked this in meetings with Heather, I've asked it in meetings with the mayor. Given the fact that we have incredibly high service levels in the city of St. Charles, we provide everything that everybody asks for. We have a very large community that has continued to grow. We continue to add businesses. We have a strategic plan. We have a comprehensive plan. We don't tend to follow it as we approve developments, as we approve businesses, as we approve housing developments, as we acquire parcels. And I guess my question is, at what point do we as a body sit down and determine who does St. Charles want to be? How are we going to fund ourselves going forward? How are we going to fill that pot? Are we going to do that on the backs of taxpayers individually? Are we going to add houses? Are we going to add more rooftops? Are we going to bring in more entertainment and try and bring that funding from outside, from visitors? And are we going to strategically plan for that? Are we going to seek the right expertise? Are we going to invest in the expertise that it takes to get the right types of things? Are we going to look into things like planning appropriately to put aside parcels for the right types of entertainment venues or space for those things? And I guess I've not seen us have those conversations and really get to a point where we are in agreement about things like asking for maybe a moratorium on building in a certain space until we have an agreement on what should really go there from a planning and development standpoint for the future of St. Charles. And I guess I'm just not sure, when does that happen? Because I'm coming into my third year here and have not had that conversation in a public forum or in any kind of grand scheme of things. And we're always talking about how are we going to have enough money. And I hear things like, let's find some creative ways to have revenue. But anytime a creative solution is put forward, it is tamped down because that would be a tax or a fee on a resident. So I guess there's conflicting, asks and answers, and I'm just not sure how we're planning to do these things.
So I think there are two things that we need to redo. One is comprehensive plan. I've talked with Russell about that and getting that in the pipeline. So we're going to be doing some staff level work this year to prep for that in the summer of 27, just because there will be a lot of work that we have to do at a staff level for that first. And then coinciding with that, we want to do a strategic plan update. I think most of the council who is up there right now participated in our current strategic plan. But as we change out any council members, it really becomes necessary every 2 years to do an update to that. And I think this is the appropriate time. So I will be budgeting for this upcoming fiscal year to do that, hopefully quickly after the fiscal year starts, to get a consultant on board to go through that exact exercise. And those are the exact times to have those discussions so that we can implement it into a plan. And I think you're also getting to one of the things that I know I've talked to several council members about, is that staff follows the strategic plan, and that drives what we're putting in the budget every year. And it becomes extremely difficult if we've got a handful of new council members every 2 years that want to change the direction of the city, because we've got to then pivot with things that have either already been in place or are currently in the works. That is why that document becomes really important to us. When we make recommendations, it's based off that document. So we're not ad hoc trying to come up with either budget money or change the direction mid-year on things. So as we embark upon that this summer, I think that's going to be a really crucial document for all of the council to give that feedback and really articulate a clear plan so staff can continue to follow that with our recommendations on budget decisions.
And I certainly understand that, and I'd like to say two things about that. One is, I'm concerned, given the fact that we have two very important parcels that are, one, we've already had a plan presented for at Pheasant Run. The other, hopefully there will be something soon at Charlestown Mall. It'll be too late by the time that happens. And those are, I think, really important areas for what I just talked about. I'm concerned that when those things come up, I don't know that everybody up here really has the data and the information about what our current strategic plan is, and are making decisions based on that. And I don't know that, that we can afford to wait that long to look at what we should be thinking about for the future. And, you know, I would like us to accelerate that if we can.
Okay, anything else?
I have one question, quick one. Artificial intelligence, AI, do you see that playing a role in our processes at all for capturing?
It already is. We are starting to implement that. We've got some basic policies right now, but we are working on it on the technology side between our website, and then using it internally for different things. I know that the city clerk is using it for the minutes already, so we are finding small ways to implement it right now, and then working on those bigger picture solutions.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, let's do this. And before we start the next one, it's been great questions and great staff. Let's, instead of setting a time, let's just, anybody that has to use the washroom, let's go ahead and do that and then come right back. And I think Tara probably has some churros over there.
Would you
And then that can be.
All right, everybody
Is that
is
enough
back,
for you?
and so Bill, if you want to go ahead and start the next
Right.
presentation.
Okay. Round 2. So you can do it.
All right, thank you. So we're moving on to the remaining portions for discussion tonight. As I mentioned, we're just going to touch on bond rating and outstanding debt, then discuss lead service line replacement and utility rate study in conjunction with that discussion. So the city has an outstanding bond rating from Moody's. We've had the current rating of AA1 since around 2011. That rating is one notch less than the highest rating possible of AAA. Moody's has had, certain metrics and way they analyze certain things in place for a long time. Some of you may remember back in 2023, we talked a little bit more about the change that Moody's did with some of their metrics and how they look at different municipalities and state and local governments. They're taking a more broad approach and analysis, looking at all governmental funds and enterprise funds, long-term liabilities, rather than specific metrics like the general fund or different more narrow focuses. So I've listed an initial, this is what Moody's looks at from a broad perspective in their 4 main categories. They look at the economy, resident income, full value per capita, and economic growth. They look at financial performance, available fund balance ratios, and liquidity ratios. They also look at institutional framework, and they also look at leverage. What are our long-term liabilities, pension liabilities, debt liabilities, all those long-term liabilities. And they also look at those fixed cost ratios. So the city has maintained this bond rating, and why is this important? Well, it's a good indicator of the city's overall, fiscal status and how an independent agency like Moody's, looks at the city. The city hasn't gone out to debt for several years for new money, but we will probably at some point do a bond refunding. So once we go out for a refunding or a refunding in combination with new issuance money, the better bond rating we have, the lower interest rate we are likely to get when we go to market those bonds with an underwriter. So there's different levels of importance with some of this, and so I wanted to just kind of touch on that a little bit deeper. Related to that, and when talking about long-term liabilities, and I alluded to this a little bit earlier, this is a chart of the city's outstanding general obligation debt at the end of the fiscal year, as well as outstanding IEPA loans the city has taken on for various water and sewer improvements. So as I started to talk a little bit about, the city, hasn't issued any new bonds since 2021. Overall, we've seen, because of that, we've been able to pay down the general obligation debt from about $109 million at the end of 22 to about $82 million in the current fiscal year. At the same time, we've had a lot of really important critical water and sewer projects. The city applied for and received low-interest loans for those projects. So while we have continued to pay down our outstanding IEP loans, we are issuing and taking on new IP loans for various projects like the Riverside Lift Station, the West Side Treatment Plant expansion. Those are a couple examples of recent projects that were completed where the city took on additional loans to complete those projects. The city is currently doing the on the east side, the Well 8 expansion project for that treatment facility over there as well. That's about $15 million project over 2 years, and that's a current IEP loan funded project. So once completed, I would expect to see, an increase in the outstanding IEP loans associated with that the city has to pay back as part of that metric. While we've been able to decrease that outstanding GO debt, we've seen the IEP loans increase, but overall we've seen an overall increase. We've seen an overall decrease over the last few years in terms of total debt per capita. I know that was something we talked about a few years ago It was around 5,100 per capita. Now it's about 45, 46 based on the projected numbers at the end of this fiscal year. We have been able to, like I mentioned earlier, decrease the amount of money that we transfer out of the general fund for debt repayment. That's gone from $5.8 million back in 2023 to $4.3 million projected for next fiscal year. So that helps alleviate, free up a little bit of funds to fund some of the increases that we see in operating services in the general fund. So going forward, because of our existing debt profile, if we are going to consider bond financing, it's something that we want to be very strategic about and careful about moving forward. That's what I wanted to summarize about that. Or any questions on that before I move on? Yes.
You state from 2022 on, it looks like every year $6 or $7 million is coming off the debt. Is that consistently going to keep going out for the next 5-10 years, or is this just,
Generally, yeah. Generally, the way those things are structured, it's a gradual repayment of that principal over time. Everything's pretty much level debt service payments, so you'd see a gradual, actually slightly increase in the principal pay down over time because you're paying more principal and less interest, especially with that level debt service payment.
Great, thank you.
So, Bill, with the number of bonds we have out between the general obligation and what's the interest rate spread between the IAPA loans and the general obligation, knowing what we have with our Moody's ratings? Are they similar, or what's the breakdown?
Sure. The IAPA loans are low interest loans, so they're roughly going to be about half whatever the market was able to provide from a GO debt financing perspective. So I think the last round we did for IAPA loans was about 2.1%. And so the current debt market for new issuance money is probably closer to 4% on a tax-exempt basis.
Great. Thank you.
How will our loans that we'll need to take out for lead line replacement impact this?
So right now we don't have any IAPA loans for lead line replacement, but
because we're not.
It would add to the overall. It would add to the overall, burden, and those have to be repaid. So just like a bond, loan has to be repaid over a 20-year period.
So we're going to basically reset. Lead pipe replacement is going to cause us to basically reset back.
If we ever became eligible and made the funding cut for IEP loans, and part of the discussion tonight is, if that's a realistic possibility at all, and should we look in other areas to try and meet that mandate? One thing I'll mention later on too is that there are a number of water and sewer capital projects separate from the whole lead line services discussion that are critical to the water and sewer utilities that are IEP loan eligible, new wells, treatment plant expansions. So as we talk about those projects, those are IEP loan eligible likely projects. So, we're talking about the overall debt right now, so we can frame it in terms of, we don't want to get overall too much in debt in terms of bonds and loans combined. So that's why we're kind of talking about these together before we start the next discussion, so that we have a framework going forward.
Ron? Hold on. Can you go back one slide, please? So our rating is, AA1. So we're literally right below prime, correct?
The top rating, right.
Right. So what would we have to do to get the prime rating, and is it worth it? Or what would we have to do, and what benefits are there to be there?
That's a good question. I think that'd be a great discussion item, for the future. I think, if you look at the chart here and you look at the two things that are weighted the heaviest here, it's fund balance ratios, which includes not just the general fund, but all funds, available cash and fund balances, and long-term liabilities. Those are the two things that Moody weights the heaviest. So if you think about pension liabilities, you think about general obligation bonds outstanding, IEP loans outstanding, other liabilities. We're heavy on the non-pension related liabilities. So I think that's one factor that might be challenging for us to, get to that AAA.
Does Moody's tell you, hey, here's what you need to do to go to the next, do they give you like, hey, if you want to move up a notch, do they tell you what you need to do and what one of these sections you need to improve on, or is it just?
Yeah, so they do a variety of things. They issue their annual scorecard, and I think we've sent that to the city council every December the last 2 years since they started that, and it kind of gives an update on the metrics that they look at. And when you go out for a bond rating and get that independent rating, and there's a lot of different steps in the process, they will often give you a narrative about, what factors may increase the rating in the future and what factors may decrease the rating in the future. Okay. But since we haven't gone out to the debt market since 2021, we haven't had that sort of, other than updating our metrics, we haven't had that sort of overall assessment, going out to the debt market since 2021.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Any other questions on that? So this is the lead service line replacement unfunded mandate. This is really the cover slide that Public Works has used, Tim Wilson, when discussing about lead service lines over the last couple years. So just a little background. The existing mandate is to replace all lead and galvanized service lines in a 10-year period. This has been discussed at Government Services Committee several times over the last 2 years, most recently on October 27th. Related to that, the city adopted a policy April 2024 that the city would be financially responsible for replacement of the full service line, both the private and the public portion. As conveyed at the last meeting, there are approximately 3,400 of those lead or galvanized lines in the city out of 12,900 water services within the city, so roughly 26%. As conveyed at the last meeting, that cost per service line is about $21,000 for both the public portion and the private portion combined, and that's just a rough average per line. So the total cost in today's dollars to meet this unfunded mandate is $84 million, roughly $8.4 million on an annual basis. And this is the first full calendar year for that replacement. Public Works is preparing those bid documents and is hoping to have a bid award sometime in April. So we need to find consensus on a direction to fund and beat this unfunded mandate. So I'm stealing things from Public Works, and this is one of those maps that they presented at different Government Services Committee meetings. So this is a map of confirmed lead line locations throughout the community. There are 5 different priorities based on census tract data that I believe Public Works has to follow when they go about analyzing where can they begin to start replacing lead service lines. I don't have the specifics, but those are the priority zones as established, and if there are any specific questions on that, I'll defer to Director Sewer. Okay.
Can I ask a question?
Yep.
I know we need to do this and I want to do this, but is there any such thing as calling up Illinois and saying, can we have more time? What would happen if we don't do this in 10 years?
It's a federal thing.
Sorry, it's a federal mandate?
Yeah. It's a federal mandate. I think that question has probably been asked hundreds of times by different communities throughout the country, and, there's no, that I'm aware of, or Administrator McGuire, Director Sewer is aware of it. Any inclination that this is going to change anytime in the future?
They're still working through what they're going to do if people don't comply, but I think the questions that we have figured out at this point are there will probably be some sort of regular notice to all of those people who are affected that you have a lead line, the city is not replacing your line, and then potentially some sort of penalties for us, some inability potentially to get future IEPA loans. This isn't going to be a situation where we just get to say we don't have the money, we're not doing it, and have no repercussions. But they haven't defined what those repercussions are yet.
Okay.
If I can kind of add to that question, I know that there are communities that they have had congressmen who have found appropriations to help, and I know that we're not an impoverished community. We do have a lot of lead lines, however, and I know that elections happen. I know there will be opportunities for that, and I would just like to ask to keep that in mind and make sure we're asking for money.
I actually just had a conversation with Representative Ugassi last week, and Director Seward just put together a list for me and a narrative so I can provide that to him to see if there's anything we can do, because I basically crafted the same story that, look, we're 39 out of 43 communities ranked for demographics. We're nowhere close to ever getting funding for this. There's not enough money to go to the communities that need it most. We're definitely not going to be getting these, so is there anything that we can do either to change the timeline or to potentially get some grant funding? So I'm going to send that document to him this week and hope for some movement on it. I don't know how that will go, but I'm reaching out and making those conversations.
Yeah.
Well, I think you can look, I mean, I know it's an example that's way back, but if you look at when the federal government wanted all the states to go to .08 out of BAC and said they'd withhold federal highway funds unless every state complied, so they forced compliance. And so I think that there's a playbook. And the other thing is again, when, you know, to your point, Jamie, when you look at our finances as compared to others, there's going to be a lot of surrounding communities that are in the exact same position we are. And so, you know, I mean, we're not alone in this. And then I think the other part is when you're, like you had said, when you're looking at the 84 million, the other factor that we didn't discuss and that we've talked about, though, is how many contractors are out there that are going to do this work and how much bid's going to be done. So I think, you know, it's one of those things, what can we do? The other question I had was just, I know that the council made a decision in 2024 about the fact that we were going to take this on. Like any policy, if this council decided that they wanted to change that, we would have that ability to do that, correct?
I will defer to Pete only because we had to submit this plan to the IEPA to get it approved. Now, that's not to say we couldn't go back, but the option would be to, I think, not pay for the private side of it, but we have to have a plan to replace these within 10 years, basically.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'd add to that is, yes, of course we can change policy, but that wouldn't happen overnight. So we've already planned for this April to build out a plan for our contractors to go in and replace all of the service line, just as was directed to us 2 years ago from council. If council wanted to make that change for, say, 2 years from now, we'd probably have time to get back to IEPA, resubmit our plans, rework our scope of services that we bid out. All of those things take time. So I don't think the answer is no, but it's not, it can't happen quickly.
Well, I mean, I just think it's when we're making this decision about the future and where this money is coming from, and we're talking about whether we're going to increase water and sewer rates and what percentage we may increase them by, and do we want to take money. I mean, that has to be an option that could be considered. I understand you're also going to run into people that said, they didn't have to pay for it, now I did. But to your point, it's a factor that could be considered.
So in terms of funding, I think as kind of alluded to, there's, you know, very limited, if any, free grant money out there. I think, you know, people are trying, but it's just not a lot out there. The city did apply for IEPA loans. There was $241 million in loans available. There was over $1 billion in funding requests made to the IEPA, and St. Charles ranked 39th out of 43 communities on the waiting list. So that was the situation as it unfolded late last year. From, you know, my perspective, other people's perspective, that makes it, you know, probably very unlikely that we would be able to make an eligibility list for a low interest loan in the future. I did talk earlier about the low interest loan rate. It is 2.1% currently. The one thing with IEPA loans is that, you know, that does, whether it's this project or any water sewer project, that does necessitate some additional requirements on contractors that could result in some additional costs incurred related to the entire project, maybe potentially restrict some bidders. So the one, you know, very small positive that may come out of this is, you know, the bidding and pool available for certain contractors may get, you know, very slightly favorable. And lastly, just wanted to mention that, given the city's overall debt burden, the likelihood that the city may need to take on additional loans or debt for other water and sewer projects, looking at an alternate funding source to meet this mandate, will need to be identified. So I just thought I'd walk through some of the broad options. Start with, can the city issue bonds for this? The city could look at doing a $10 to $20 million bond issuance either every year or every other year. One of the challenges that we looked at was the potential that this might have to be a taxable bond issuance, given the fact that we're dealing with a partial private service line, so private use, so that may result in a higher interest rate rather than a tax-exempt rate. So if we do, and we talked about this with bond counsel, if we are looking at trying to do this with bonding, it may cost the city more than anticipated, given it may have to be a taxable interest rate. If it was a taxable interest rate, just for an example, a $10 million issuance would be about $850,000 repayment over a 20-year period, or roughly $17 million total P&Is over that 20-year period. So just providing some context on what that may look like if you try to do that for just a singular year.
So would it be 17 times 8 altogether, or 10?
It would be $17 million in total principal and interest payments over a 20-year period.
We have to do that.
Yes.
So $170 million to pay for $84 million.
No.
It seems like a bad deal.
I mean, at a very high level, yeah.
This is not staff's recommendation, but we certainly want to give that option because obviously that defers the bulk of the payments over the course of 20 years, but because of the high dollar amount we're working with, correct. It's the same adage of we're paying way more to do the same project.
And as I mentioned earlier, the city still does have a GO debt level around 82 million. Obviously, that's less than 2021, but still it's relatively high. And the city may need to rely on its bonding authority in the future for some other water and sewer capital projects. So it may be something the city needs to think carefully about and strategic about in terms of how we try and deploy that bonding authority for different projects.
I was going to ask, I don't know if it's an unrelated topic, but it does seem like there have been a lot of water main breaks lately. I know it's been bad weather and so on, but is that...
We're going to cover that.
Here going to affect that? Okay.
We'll cover that in a little bit on the slide.
Yep. So anyway, wanted to outline some of the mechanics and considerations if the city tried to issue debt to fund the mandate. Again, not recommending certain options, just kind of laying them out. But, the city could look at some sort of tax increase, general property tax increase, and simply for context, we listed it. If it was tried to do, an $8 million increase, it's about a 52% increase over the existing operating levy, and that would be roughly an impact of $473 for a $400,000 home on an annual basis. So, again, just wanted to, put it out there for reference. As we walk through some of these things, we may get to a point where there's different combinations of considerations that we want to do. But wanted to at least put this out there so that you kind of understood the total impact of something like that. So option 3 would be alternate funding sources or some sort of rate increase. Really kind of broken up into 3 different, really 2 options, and the third being a combination of different things. So we have the option to look at a variety of alternate revenue sources, such as different taxes or fee increases. We could also look at building this cost into the overall water rate, or we could look at some combination of those 2.
Bill, do you know what that rate would have to be roughly?
Yeah.
Increase?
Yeah, I'm going to...
sorry, go ahead.
I'm going to... Yeah, no, it's fine. And I think for context, I'm going to cover what our potential alternate funding sources for things generally, and then we're going to segue a little bit into the rate study to try and understand how it the current issues within the rate study impact lead line services funding, and then it would kind of bring it all back to a comprehensive discussion so everyone had the complete information and understanding.
Got it. Thank you. Well,
yes.
And I don't know if this is a possibility, but if we took at everything that you showed us with the previous presentation and those budgets froze, how much would that free up money-wise?
Can I say it a different way? Sorry.
No. So I'm just trying to say, like, if there isn't a percent increases yearly, if it just stayed at what it was,
well,
right? And in that way, is that enough to help a little bit? Is that a different way of looking at where it's like, I hate to do hard freeze, I hate to do like the hard freeze that way, but does that help? Because it's like, if everything keeps going up that way, if it's like, no, it's going to stay at a certain percentage or number, does that help? Could it help, or am I not?
No, can I take it a step further? So if you look at your subtotal departments by fiscal year, and you look at the annual revenue, property tax, sales tax that has been coming in over the last 5 years, and how those numbers are going up. If you don't qualify for loans and you really are uncomfortable going to some of these other options because the money's going to pay, is there an option here to talk about, you know, going back to your fiscal year spend, say of 22, 23, where you're at $50 million, trying to make it work, plus your sales tax revenue increases would be about $10 or $12 million, which would immediately be diverted to your lead pipe replacement. So yeah, we know that we're moving something from one column to the next, but it's all going towards tackling this one problem, so you don't have to bond out. Is that option considered?
I think that, you know, based on the discussion earlier in that presentation, you know, just talking about the different cost drivers going into just maintaining the existing level of services within the community, anytime you're looking at some sort of freeze, I think you're definitely going to look at, you know, service impacts and a variety of issues, you know, both externally to customers and residents and internally, you know, to staff and employees as well. So.
Well, right, but the alternative is a $100 million price tag that, I mean, or a property tax increase. So either way, you're going to have a tough conversation. But this goes back to, you know, the earlier conversation about your sustainability and trying to get ahead of this and understanding, well, we have to be at 5, 7, 11%. Well, if 4 years, when did the lead pipe replacement stuff come out?
2023 it started. We had our plan in place 2024.
So hypothetically, in fiscal year 22-23, if you knew this thing was hitting you, said, listen, you wrote all your sub-department totals and you're at, call it 51 million, your sales tax revenue keeps climbing, we're going to take that, you know, that middle margin and start putting that aside immediately for a lead pipe replacement, we'd probably be in a different spot right now. Now we're kind of trapped of, you're not going to qualify for these low interest loans. We can't touch any of our sub-department, subtotal numbers, so you're kind of either going to have to increase property taxes.
So we're going to go over some other options first. So it's not just property taxes or, what was the other thing that you just brought up? Bonding. Those aren't the only two options. So we've got some other options for council to consider. But I want to go back to this general fund concept, and we have tried to communicate that very little of our spending in the general fund is discretionary spending. So while that number goes up every year, there are a large percentage of that is set in things that we don't have control over, whether that's collective bargaining agreements, whether that is contractual services that we're obligated to provide, health insurance premiums. I'll throw things in there like TRICOM that we pay for our dispatch service. That's going up $40,000 this year that we just have to find money for. That's going to go up more next year. So there are things like that that are not just policy directives from council that have been implemented over time, but things that we at a core have to provide. And we're probably talking about maybe if you cut out a lot of the fluff, like, and I think fluff, I'm talking mosquito abatement and planting our planter beds, we're talking under $1 million. So when our budget goes up, it's out of necessity, and we keep our budget very well managed and very tight with very little superfluous spending in there. So the numbers that we have could not accommodate a freeze in a budget without layoffs. That's what you're talking about when you're talking about finding the money for these utility rates in our general fund. You are laying off a large portion of our staff, and that is police, fire, and public works. And that's what it comes down to, truthfully.
Well, and again, these aren't going to be fun conversations, but the alternative potentially is you're talking about bonding something out to a giant, balloon payment over the course of those 10 years, a property tax increase, which will go over like a lead balloon. So like none of these become fun conversations, but this literally is at the root of my concern about your financial wellness and your ability to sustain and do these tough things. The 20, I don't know how many of us are in this room, but 30 of us that are in this room, we're all in this boat together right now. And how you're going to figure out, somebody's going to be left when the music stops figuring out how you're going to answer this tough question of paying for a lead pipe replacement.
So some of the recommendations that we've made over the last 4 years before we've gotten into lead service line have attempted to keep us afloat in our utilities and our basic needs. We have not kept pace with those, so the numbers needed to then get to where we need to go today are going to be even higher. And that is sort of the problem of municipal budgets in general. It's very easy to defer capital projects in order to keep budgets flat. That doesn't undo the need to do those capital projects. It just makes them more expensive down the road, and then you get to a point where you have to do them. And as I can't remember who asked about water main breaks. Our water main breaks are spiking because we're not dedicating the appropriate number to funding our water main replacement. So on top of lead service lines, we've now got to deal with that. So when staff is looking at numbers and planning long-term based on policy directives from council and best practices, and we make these recommendations, it is one, to minimize any single-year spike to our residents, but keep it manageable from a operational perspective and making sure our infrastructure is intact. And now we're at a situation where we've got a number of projects we have to do. We don't have the choice about. Lead service lines, we do not have the choice to just kick the can down the road on, and we have to figure out a way to fund them. So we've tried to come up, and Bill's going to go over those options next that are least impactful to our residents as a whole and can potentially offset some of the revenue resources to people that are coming into our city to spend money as well.
So I'll preface the next slide with saying that this is something we'll get back to once we start walking through some of the pieces regarding the water, sewer, and electric utilities, and just a brief update on the rate study. So, this is something that I know has been mentioned by a few alderpersons about having some conversations about, what are some alternative revenue sources that the city has to, help fund with additional capital project funding or other purposes for various needs. So this is a sort of a comprehensive of the primary ones that have been talked about over the last, several years in various contexts. The city does have a current home rule sales tax rate of 1.5%. I think one of the things that we tried to do is just illustrate, what an increase in that rate might generate in terms of additional revenue. The city has a local fuel tax of 2 cents. A lot of communities that have that tax have a rate closer to 4 or 5 cents, so that's something that could be considered. Some of these different ideas and options may be more appropriate for general capital projects, things driven by, transportation and other issues such as the fuel tax being dedicated towards streets and infrastructure. So there's a lot of different conversations and considerations with any one of these. But I wanted to just kind of list them out here as a starting point. This is not comprehensive. There are other things out there that we could look at. But I just wanted to list, I think, some of the more common ones that, can be considered. One thing I wanted to note that if the city ever wanted to consider any sort of real estate transfer tax, that requires referendum. That's not something that the city could just implement. So whether it's on the buyer or the seller, there's a referendum requirement associated with that. So like I said, we're going to pause on this, but get back to it after we work through the next section in terms of utilities and update on the utility rate study. But is there any questions on this list right now before we jump to the next section? Yes, Alderman.
Going back to the home rule sales tax increase, a 1% would bring in $10 million a year, you're saying? And
yes.
then what does that reflect of a typical, I don't know, $300,000 or $400,000 home? Do you know offhand or no?
It's difficult to say. That's a good question. That's something we can talk about a little bit in terms of, what a typical spend out of a household may be.
Yeah.
And what that may, be. A lot of different considerations for that type of tax. Obviously, a lot of it, maybe a majority of it is, paid by non-residents. So there's a lot of different, things to consider with that.
And I think the way that we usually use that metric when we talk about the home rule sales tax is that purchase threshold. So $1 on 100, $10 on 1,000. So it's more of those, just part of the purchase that oftentimes that $100 spend, that extra dollar, people don't always notice.
Because I still, I don't want to get too caught up in this, but believe that we do offer a lot of services. We've offered a high level of services forever. And going back to someone made the comment earlier, I think it was Bill or Heather, we're playing catch up, and we did the same thing with the electric utility, and we're looking at it now with the water utility. At some point, these have to be able to fund themselves. And that's part of the problem. I don't want to say we haven't, done the right thing. It's just we've been trying to avoid what we're looking at now.
Real quick, the home rule sales tax, because I remember when we implemented this and we codified it to go into streets, I don't remember the details, but I do recall you mentioning that there was, so there were certain things that it didn't apply to, like groceries or what have you. Can we amend that list if we were to increase it? Or is that like set by statute or something? Or?
That's set by statute. Okay. We would have to adhere to what's defined in the statute. So it does not apply to groceries,
like medicine,
drugs, medical appliances, or titled vehicles. Those are basically the main things that it doesn't apply to.
And I think you also did have some data, and obviously you don't have it now, but that the percentage of non-residents that typically, so we can track that? Okay.
Yep, back then we did a rough estimate based on, who's in town, Costco, different things, but we thought maybe 40 to 60%, maybe half, is paid by non-residents based on, and some of that followed the data when we were talking about the grocery tax too. A lot of there was a significant majority of people coming from out of town that supported those.
Can you also do that for the local fuel? Do you have data? Can you at least sort of extrapolate what percentage of residents might pay that, or not?
I don't know. Oh. I can certainly look into it. Yeah.
Just looking at all of the options and consideration of other options, is it possible to put, and since this would fund the lead service line replacement, would it be possible to put a sunset clause in any of these policies if it's dedicated for the lead pipe? Once it's paid for, then that tax gets removed, if you will.
We could certainly incorporate different types of provisions into different options, especially on the local level. The state, last time I checked, I don't believe they can, what's the word I'm looking for?
Repeal?
Monitor or repeal. They can't do an automatic repeal based on a sunset provision in an ordinance. I believe it would have to be a separate ordinance repealing it. But other than that, certainly you can commit, restrict, direct, any one of these things, however a council would see what they would want to. So you could pivot as well if something changed down the road and you had something that was committed for a certain purpose, go back and repurpose that or decrease it or eliminate it if it was no longer needed after a certain amount of time.
Okay.
The only thing I'll add to that too is obviously I think last year we talked about, over $400 million worth of improvements that they had. The benefit of doing an increase like this is it becomes a permanent revenue source for us. And certainly we could repeal it or alternatively look at lowering other resident-based taxes in lieu of that tax too. So there are different ways that we could use that long-term after the funding was done.
Okay, thank you.
Just following up on what Ed requested, I think it would be really helpful if we could add a column to the sections on the chart on what the average cost would be to the average resident.
Yeah, that's something Derek, Roy, and myself can start having some discussions about.
And then since I see our good friend Steve in the audience, I have never forgotten his tire idea. Was it a tax on tire recycling?
No, it's a disposal fee.
A disposal fee, thank you, Bob. Is that, I don't know if that's a significant potential source, but is there anything else new like that we could consider? We have so many car dealers here.
Yeah. I mean, there's a variety of things out there that we could consider. I didn't want to, kind of try and be completely exhaustive as I could.
Yeah.
I know I don't think it's very popular, but there are some communities that are implementing streaming taxes as a way to offset.
Wait, not that.
What's that?
That might kill me personally, but we should look at that.
Just with the decline that we've seen in cable franchise revenue, DirecTV, obviously different habits, that's something that a couple different communities have done recently.
Well, this is my favorite option so far, is to disperse it over lots of different things, some of them impacting non-residents as well.
All right, well.
And I mean, one of my favorite things is always looking at what other people are doing. I mean, we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We're not the only municipality that's facing this. So I just encourage you, as we continue to go on, that we can continue to look at our neighbors and use Metro West as a good place to go. I mean, Heather, I'm sure we're doing that, but again.
Yeah, we are. This one in particular becomes difficult to compare to other communities because of the percentage we have compared to the percentage they have, and then also the funding opportunities for it. So I think everybody's collectively having those discussions about how are they funding them, and we're trying to focus on what revenue we can bring in, because we do have a higher sales tax base than a lot of these other communities may, so potentially tapping into those other sources that don't directly impact our residents.
Right. But I even think that, it goes without saying that as it relates to the same discussion we're having about our inability or potential inability to do this, again, using Metro West and IML and the other ones to be able to have that same discussion. I mean, I've heard a couple council members say, if we're making a good faith effort, we're not going to be the only municipality that's running into this. So I just think using those resources is important. And I know every council that's been before us or be after us wants to look at what's the home rule sales tax in a neighboring community. Is it 1.5? Is it 2.5? Is it 3.5? To be able to see. We never want to be, I don't think, the leader in that area.
And we do have that list, and I think tonight, Bill's got this chart up. He's going to go into the utility rate study next, and we're going to go back to this chart at the end of that presentation to start kind of talking out some of those things and see what they're interested in exploring, so that we can put together further information for council and bring it back to.
Okay. So staff is currently working with the consultant on the utility rate study updates. And then this will kind of explain how that intersects with the unfunded mandate for lead service line replacement. Public Works recently completed the master plan updates. Those documents are on the website, so a lot of the information in there was used from a capital planning standpoint to incorporate into that rate study analysis. This is just a chart that the consultant sent over, just kind of walking through the different steps. So they take a bottom-up approach, look at the different components, operating costs currently, and what those look like based on inflation in the future. What are the existing debt service costs for each utility? What sort of new debt is the utility likely to take on because of some significant projects in any one of the three utilities? And what are the overall capital projects needed based on the 10-year master plans for electric, water, and sewer? So based on that, the consultant develops revenue rate requirements, analyzing the cost of service, and then ultimately developing rates. So I wanted to start with water, and I thought it would be helpful to illustrate the existing budget for the water fund, and that's the chart that you see on the right. This is not the proposed budget for next year. This is the budget that was adopted for the current fiscal year. So just to give you context. One of the things I also did too is we have that Well 8 expansion new well project on the east side that's being funded with IEPA loans. I excluded the portion from this chart that is being funded so that we're not showing that project plus the loans on top of this. I wanted to look at it just from the standpoint of here's our typical annual revenues and our typical annual where those resources can go. for context. So as we've talked about over the last couple of years, the water utility's seen a significant increase in operating costs, partly due to requirements, testing requirements, partly due to water main breaks and maintenance issues with the distribution system. When you look at the chart here, it kind of illustrates that, there's really not a lot of money after operations and existing debt service for capital projects. We did budget to use just a little bit of reserve that we had to help fund some other capital projects, but typically in the current situation, we have about $1.7 million available for capital projects in the water fund. And as we've mentioned in the past, the general fund has subsidized the water fund to about $5 million in total over the last 2 fiscal years, and based on kind of some conversations, probably an additional subsidy needed in the current year. Some context too, we did have to postpone a lot of water main replacement in the current year for budget considerations, so that kind of pushed the schedule back for everything kind of going forward. So water main distribution system, this is kind of some of the information contained in the master plan. The chart on the left shows the water main age by category. You can see in red that there's roughly 83 miles of water main in the distribution system that is pushing 85 years old. The total replacement cost for the entire water main distribution system, the chart on the left illustrates, is about $642 million. And in the interest of not, getting over my expert area or skis, that translates, in order to do 75-year replacement schedule for water main, that translates to about $8.5 million needed to spend on water main replacement to try and get to a 75-year replacement cycle. The type of water main that's in the ground can impact its useful life. So I've just noted a couple things in the water master plan regarding PVC pipe, ductile iron, cast iron, and how long those types of water main installation last. So. Next one. This map shows the distribution of water main by age. As you can see, a little hard to see, but the red centered around the middle of the city there is the older water main, and then branching out, to other areas of the city from there. The chart on the right is a heat map that shows the water main breaks that have occurred throughout the city through 2024. The chart on the left, I know it's kind of hard to read. This is really beyond my area, but so that chart shows the corrosive soil locations within the city of St. Charles. Those corrosive soil conditions, the red area is considered highly corrosive, can impact the useful life of water main. So I know that's a contributing factor, and I know Director Stewart can expand on that, but contributing factor to the overall useful life condition of water main distribution system. I can't tell you why it's like that, I'm just passing it on. So this is a chart of the water main breaks in the distribution system on a calendar year basis, going back to, I believe, 1996 through 2025, the end of calendar year. So I do recall, we had a discussion a couple of years back about a significant increase in water main breaks, and we did have to, hire some more people to help address that, additional operators in the field, as well as do different testing requirements. So the last year, I think the total was about 210. So kind of going back to the chart, This shows the available monies for capital projects in the existing budget for the water fund. When you add the amount of water main replacement that needs to be done annually on top of that, obviously it's a much bigger number in total. The only comparison I could think of was, we did talk about road funding back in 2023, and the city needed to do some catch up to try and, improve the city's overall road distribution network. So we were able to obviously find that money through that sales tax. And I think there's been a lot of progress made in the last 2 calendar years, a really significant amount of roads that have been done. One thing I wanted to mention, this is another area where, debt financing, is possible. We can do it, but, given the existing debt levels that the city has for GO debt and IEP loans, and additional improvements that will require debt financing in the future, it's really, I think, long-term, the best solution is to find, that ongoing revenue source in the rate structure to try and make improvements in this area. So it's very similar to anytime you have these ongoing capital expenses you have to do, you really want to treat it as an operating thing. It's just something you have to do every year. You really don't want to be issuing debt to try and fund that. You really want to find that ongoing revenue source to meet essentially an ongoing annual capital requirement.
Just so I'm clear, is it $8 to $9 million a year starting the next fiscal year? For how long?
That's what the study, master plan says we need to be spending on to do that.
For how many years would that go on? Forever?
Forever. I don't know. I don't think I can answer that.
I think it'd be cheaper if we bought everyone bottled water. What do you say?
Yeah.
Just kidding.
So as we walk through, what does that really mean? We've talked internally, Public Works and myself, that, that is a lot of water main to be trying to replace on an annual basis. So there's have to be some ramp-up period. And we've taken that into account as we've been walking through what does this mean from a rate structure. So I've alluded to other water treatment capacity improvements that have been identified, in the master plan. One we have ongoing right now, that's the Well 8 new well treatment expansion project on the east side. That's about $15 million IEP loan funded. We talked about the water main replacement on an ongoing basis. There are 3 different capacity treatment projects that Public Works and the master plan identifies that need to be considered from a development standpoint, growth standpoint, or mandate standpoint regarding treatment. Another new well, and I know testing's ongoing, ammonia treatment at well 11, and then PFAS treatment potentially at well 9 and 11. I'm not going to talk any more about the details of those things, but just in total, that's $50 million of additional work that has been identified to be taken on at some point over the next 3 to 6 years. So kind of the same analysis on the sewer side. This is the existing budget for the sewer fund. And you can see we have sewer user charges more than water. Water is about $10 million, sewer is 13.3. Somewhat similar story, but different on the sewer side. Sewer utility operations are about $7.5 million. Debt service existing for the sewer fund is about $5 million, which is about 37% of current revenue. So there's been a lot of major sewer projects done over the years that have an annual debt service repayment requirement, such as the Riverside Lift Station and West Side Treatment Plant expansion. Capital outlay right now in the current budget is about $4.2 million. That was, using some money that we had in reserve. So really there's about $1.8 million in reserve available on an annual basis for the sewer fund. Similar to the water fund, I excluded the trunk main phase 2B and interfund loan that was originally part of the budget, as that was put on hold of around $8.5 million, just to have a good comparison when we're looking at this chart. So like water, there's a lot of significant sewer utility capital projects. I think the Eastern Sanitary Sewer Interceptor trunk main, that's been talked about several times. Ultimately, there's a phase 2 that needs to be done now, and a phase 3 after that, running down to the treatment plant, each about roughly $20 million in total. I'll defer to Director Sewer or Administrator McGuire on some of those, but a lot of that is, development-driven, future growth-driven, but some of this is based on existing needs right now and not necessarily based on PE or future development. The map I included on the side is the different basins, drainage basins, and so these 3 basins over here, as I understand it, are kind of what contributes to that increase in the trunk main capacity that needs to be done on the east side. So there are a number of other treatment plant projects scheduled to be done at various times over the next several years. Again, some of these are small that probably can be funded through the existing or modified rate structure going forward. Some will require, IEP loans to fund, including expansion on the main, on the east side plant and the west side plant. Any questions on that? Lastly is the electric utility. Again, showing the existing fiscal year 25-26 budget, supported $62 million with user charges. Operations are $14 million. Purchase power costs with IMEA was budgeted around $44 million. In contrast to the water and sewer utility, very small debt service obligations for the electric fund and budgeted capital outlay of around $8.7 million. Overall, the electric fund is in very good financial status structurally going forward and its current fiscal position. Unrestricted net position around $54 million, which can provide, rate stability and flexibility for unanticipated cost increases and really minimal capital improvements needed going forward. Some of those could be transformer replacement, cable replacement, possible AMI implementation in the future, but overall, not at the level of the significant level for water sewer that we just talked about. So, from a rate study standpoint, looking at the numbers and projections, again, these are still being tweaked. We're trying to update some things from the current, budget process and making sure the models make sense. But based on the rate study update as of right now, we think that a moderate rate decrease on the electric fund side, is warranted, somewhere in the neighborhood of 5%, based on the forecasted power, 10-year plan, and operating requirements. Taking a look at their budget, making sure what we're budgeting is right-sized and appropriate, we think a small electric rate decrease would be warranted. On the sewer side, we do have a couple of 5% increases already programmed for the next 2 years. Right now, we think, a slight modification to 10%, is probably what we're thinking in the neighborhood over the next several years instead of 5. So probably some minor adjustments versus what we currently have, but nothing incredibly different, from what we currently have looking at. For the water fund, there's a couple things we wanted to outline, and it kind of depends on how lead service lines are funded. If we wanted to fund lead service lines entirely within the water rate structure, you're looking at roughly 3-year rate increases, and that assumes no general fund subsidy from the general fund to the water fund to help support some of those projects. That's kind of the baseline worst worst type of scenario. Another type of option would be a portion of lead service lines are funded with some sort of additional revenue. That being the case, and including a gradual ramp up of water main replacements, right now the 3-year increase for the water side would be less than above at roughly 35% and then 30% the next 2 years. And that assumes that we would subsidize the water fund to about $4 to $5 million in the current year to help fund some of those projects that need to get done next year. Lastly, if there was a scenario where lead service lines were funded completely outside the water rate structure, right now the models say that, you know, a 3-year increase is around 25% and then 20% the next 2 years, including that one-time subsidy and a ramp up would be what those requirements are looking at. I mentioned the utility bill off to the right. It's a sample bill of $200 just to show proportionally what a typical allocation of someone's utility bill looks like, both from electric, water, and sewer. Proportionately, you know, obviously it's not all three being equal, and that does kind of play into, you know, the obvious question is, what does this really mean in impact, you know, from a sample user?
Would the 10% for sewer cover everything that you said that was needed on the prior slide?
Yeah, that's, yeah, but a lot of the improvements that we're talking about on the sewer side are going to be debt funded, so it's a matter of making sure that revenue increase is covering all those new debt service requirements that we'll be looking at.
When you say several years, are you talking just 4, or what's several years?
So I've listed out the initial 3 years. That seemed to be where the some of those impacts are. Going after that, I think it's for, you know, mostly water and sewer, it's more moderate, maybe 5, 6, 7. But for the purpose of this discussion, we kind of wanted to focus on that initial 3-year period for this.
Bill, with these options here, once the lead pipes are replaced, some communities are doing them completing them in 5 years, 6 years. It depends how fast they go. Could that be adjusted back down once it's complete and paid for?
Sure, and that's part of the balancing act between looking at rates and looking at different options or some combination. You do have that flexibility to adjust, redeploy, pivot if you need to. So,
is that something we could put in? I'm just talking out loud here. In policy, if we say we like option B, and then say once the lead pipes are completed, the rates will go down by X amount. Is that something that is doable?
Yeah, we can craft and write anything we need into the code to govern that. That far out, it gets a little tricky because some of those intervening years, we're not exactly sure what may or may not need to be done. You can certainly write something in the code that would govern that.
Bill, sorry, really quick. So just to clarify, when your answer for my last question, you mentioned 3 years. I understand for the water fund, you broke that down to 3 years.
Yeah.
I was talking about the sewer fund that you mentioned 10% for the next several years. Are you still referring to 3 years of that too?
Basically 3 years. We're still fine tuning. There could be a 4th year out there, but you know, we're still kind of wanted to focus on this initial 3 years, but nothing big beyond that level of 5 to 10.
Got it. Okay.
Certainly we can follow up that, get more specific next meeting.
Why are we only looking at 3 years for the water when it's a 10-year problem? Are you saying the 3 years is all we need to cover 10 years?
So I think the 3-year period is what we are looking at to ramp up and get it to a certain point, whatever combination that is, to address the immediate needs from an ongoing revenue source and then long-term debt service repayment. So I think there's some conversations to be had for that initial period, and then certainly we can look at going forward. But going forward, we're not looking at anything drastic. This is kind of what that little kind of ballpark looks like for the immediate 3-year period.
So we might anticipate staying level at that 30% increase for years 4 through 10, or we have to wait and see when we get there?
I think you know, you're probably looking at some other maintenance increases. I just don't have that level of detail for tonight.
Okay. And I think our goal as a staff is always to fund what is required to keep our system healthy. And ideally, we would have moderate increases every year, but that means adopting our rate study as it exists for however many years they suggest it for, so that we can get in a place to say, okay, every year after we're going to be on a just inflationary adjustment of 3, 5, 7%, whatever that may be in any given year. And in my experience, it's been a lot more palatable for residents to deal with those smaller percentage increases than those bigger ones. But every time we sort of defer that down the road, we end up with this. And if you look at option C, that's not even putting lead service lines in our rate structure. We're still looking at 25, 20, 20% because we haven't kept pace with what we needed to in previous rate studies.
Bill, I'm trying to understand with this high.
Yeah.
Was this the beginning or the end, or like what are we comparing this to? This $200?
Yeah.
Is the end result? Is the beginning?
This is existing. So this is an existing typical utility bill that has about 4,000 gallons of usage and 700 kilowatt hours a month.
Bill, why don't you go to the next slide?
Yeah.
Okay. You see where I'm? Okay.
So I think I know where you're going. So taking that $200 sample bill and weighting it appropriately based on some of those rate adjustments that we were discussing, what we try to do with each of those scenarios regarding lead service lines was to show what the blended weighted total adjustment in a utility bill would be. So when you're looking at a 5% decrease in electric rates, 10% increase sewer, and a few different options on the water side, the 1, 2, 3 at top corresponds to the 1, 2, 3 below on the water rate. So it's a lot of information, but I think it provides some fuller context when you're looking at all 3 utilities combined and then segmented options, trying to determine how we want to address lead service line replacements. So it was a lot to kind of walk through all that, but this kind of tries to paint that overall impact that we alluded to earlier, that we had to kind of work through this other presentation to get to this kind of point on discussion. I'm going to leave it there, but the last slide is that same slide we talked about earlier. So just want to kind of say that's probably, I believe that's where we're wrapping up. Yeah, pretty much. So I'm going to stop here for a second and just pause. And if there's any basic questions about what I've tried to present.
Not really a question, just a quick comment. So in essence, number 1, number 2, number 3, we're talking fully funded, like hybrid, no funding.
So
an all-in bill.
So lead service line number 1 means we fund lead service lines completely within the water rate structure. Number 2 would mean instead of we find something totaling $5 million, and the rest will be within the water rate structure. Call it $3 million. Number 3 would be we want lead service lines to have nothing to do with the water rate structure. Pull it out entirely. Don't take that into account.
And that will maintain or improve a little bit our current water situation.
Correct. We still have water, obviously, challenges, and that's why even when you remove that, you see that 25, 20, 20 at the very bottom. So this is 3 illustrative options. Obviously, there's options between options and different things to consider, but this was the simplest way that we could try and kind of paint the biggest picture to at least have a starting point.
Oh, and this also includes the your proposed electric reduction.
Yes.
Okay.
So Bill, is there a way, you hear different senior freezes or, different exceptions that are made where some taxpayers are exempt based upon, I know that's not factored in there, but that's also, we were trying to figure out how to protect our most vulnerable people.
Sure. Yeah.
They could be exempt or the lower rate, correct?
I mean, that's something we can explore. There's probably different ways to do that.
Yeah, I would be interested as you continue to go forward to explore that option, just to to see if that's something.
Like senior freeze, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, yeah.
Do they have, is there a veteran option for that too? I'm just throwing something out. I'm not trying to deny you more revenue. I'm just throwing it out.
I mean,
right.
Those are definitely things we can talk about and have that conversation.
So, Bill, just looking at this study, I mean, number 2 seems somewhat reasonable. So on the bottom, you have option 2 and 3 include $4 to $5 million general fund subsidies. So where would the $4 to $5 million fund?
That's the next slide.
So I think there's a little bit of confusion there, and I probably wasn't as clear. So as we've been trying to model next year what the water fund needs are, there's a lot of projects that need to get done. We've always kind of identified that we may need to front fund the water fund $4 to $5 million from the general fund in the current year, just to kind of keep things going, and some of these other projects that are interrelated with other capital projects and sewer projects, we can kind of get some of these projects done. So that's separate from this other revenue source that we're talking about.
Okay.
So I wanted to make sure I was distinguishing between the two.
So this is not, the $4 to $5 million is not the alternative revenue?
Correct.
Okay.
So the $4 to $5 million is simply saying, and this is something we can take a look at depending on how, but that was definitely something we felt like we needed to tentatively plug into the things that we were looking at. It could be a different number. It could be $2 million. We may wind up we're still kind of working through that process, but that's definitely, there's a lot of important things to do in the water fund, which is why we just mentioned it there.
Okay, and then number 2.
I just want to go back to that is an annual subsidy that we would have to fund from an alternate revenue source, whether that was a sales tax or something that we diverted in the general fund. So there's a one-time, correct, there's a one-time upfront 5, but then going forward, we would have to account for an additional $4 to $5 million to partially fund the lead service line as well. And
so for the upcoming year, it'd be both. So to move forward, we're looking at, a moderate use of general fund reserve, which we have the ability to do. We'll always try to deploy that in the best way possible if we needed to.
So you could use our reserves as potentially as
so that was
general.
that was a specific discussion to draw down our reserves to that initial payment and offset of that $5 million.
And then after year 3, you said you could come down on the rate because we're a little bit, wouldn't be 30%?
Correct.
Okay.
We're looking at something in the more typical, modest increases. Yeah.
Bill, so, after looking at all this, obviously there was that whole other slide that you wanted to get back to. I mean, me personally, there's a couple things I want to say. I want to say that I think it should be, a collection of a couple different things. When I look at this, when I see a 0.5% increase on the home rule sales tax, it brings in 5.3, going up to 4 cents on the fuel, that gets us another 1.6. So now we're at 6.3. We got, just for the lead line replacement, we've got to come up with another 2.5 to stay even with it. But the one thing I want to add too is that I feel like the community that acts fastest on this is going to end up with the best pricing. There's only so many contractors that are going to be able to do this work at this scale. So I feel like knowing that we're not going to realistically be able to get funds from grants or whatever, I feel like it would be really prudent and responsible for us to figure this out relatively quickly, get pricing relatively quickly, because I feel like whoever starts this process first, you can get someone in for a 3, 4, 5-year contract. The savings are going to be tremendous for our community as opposed to kicking the can for another 6 to 8 months. Like, trust me, there's only so many people that are going to be able to do this work and just keep up with it. There's a benefit to moving quick.
And Alderperson Weber, I think Bill mentioned this before too. The benefit of that with us funding it through these alternative revenue sources is we're not tied to IEPA or any other restrictions from the government. It's just our general fund money. So we don't have the same kind of either paperwork hoops or engineering to go through that we would have to otherwise.
So to Steve's point too, we're getting bids in April, correct? So that's pretty fast. So that's good. But you had, did you?
I think the moment has passed.
Oh, okay.
I just want to take a moment to thank you and your team. This is so much work to figure out a solution to an intractable problem. So I really want to thank you for, again, I feel like staff has come through with really creative solutions to very thorny problems. So I think some version, some combination of option 2, lead service line option, and some of these things together can hopefully minimize the impact of any individual tax items. And then having some plan to expire them hopefully as well, I think is a great idea, and some exceptions to people who are on low fixed incomes as well. Hopefully there's a way forward this way, so thank you.
Yeah. And Alderman Weber's point, so Peter, with going out to bid, do we already know there's a limited number of qualified contractors to do the work we're going to be asked to do?
We don't know that yet. We are concerned about that, sure. I mean, that's certainly something that we're going to have to see what we get in April. So that's just right around the corner.
Yeah.
This isn't our first time doing this. We've been actually replacing lead service lines for the last 3 years. Not at this rate, though. We're going to be shooting for 350 of them this year. I think last year we did closer to 60 or 70. And you didn't hear about it, which is a good thing. But I think we're a little bit concerned from going to 50 to 60 to 350 overnight. And also other communities are, at the threshold from the IPA regulation too, that it's go time. So yeah. We'll see.
Yeah, in that case, we're all in that together. But to Alderman Weber's point is just, if we have a limited number of contractors now, and a lot of communities are going out in before April, and now our panel is that much shorter, and being able to lock them up for a 3 or 5 year period, I think they would be at least cost per to us, and would probably save us a good deal of money if we could get ahead of it that far. So if we can, I agree with, I think the consensus is let's see what we can create with Bill and the finance team and the staff, and a couple of alternatives to get it out there and just be able to do it. So it's not going to go away, so we got to figure out a way to hit it.
I do agree with Alderperson Weber that spreading this around is a good idea. If we can go back to the last slide, I am concerned about the dramatic increase for a lot of our residents in these rates. So I want to be very mindful of that. I don't know if we can look at other communities that have had large utility rate increases and how they have managed that from a PR standpoint, from a communication standpoint, how we talk about that with our residents, and make sure that they understand the why, and that we're not simply doing this to create pain, that there's a purpose behind it, and that it could be temporary to some degree, and that it is there for a reason for them.
Yeah, and I think it's especially helpful, this slide in particular, showing not just the jump in the water rate specifically, but the overall impact to the bill, so people get a better handle on how that's actually going to impact them.
Right, and focusing on all of the pieces of that there is a reduction in their utility, that this money is going to do something for them, and that we're working through other things to help ease that burden. I think it's very important because we have residents that this is going to be a big impact to.
And I think, as I'm hearing a few of the alderpersons comment back about that middle hybrid option, as we come back, and we're not looking for decision tonight, more feedback, so we come back, if that's the will of council on number 2, we can come back with a few different scenarios, like Alderperson Weber said, of if we combine these two, maybe up the amount of revenue that's coming in, maybe that means a little bit less of an increase on those bills too, so we can play around with some numbers in a more targeted way if we know that's the direction.
Right.
A quick question, Peter, you mentioned we did 60 lead lines last year. Was that with city crews or is that contractors? I'm just curious.
Contractors.
Those
were part of street programs that we had already built in, so we worked with the street contractors and they hired the subs, so it was a little different scenario.
So our crews don't typically, we would never be able to throttle up to do that many?
No.
Okay. I was curious.
And the other consideration is too, we'll be doing this on the private side. I think we're going to want somebody else that's insured and taking care of that on the private side.
Yeah. Bill, I believe this will be done, but regarding the decrease in electric rates, when you decide to come back and present to us, whether it's a blended version of what we're going to do or an increase in home sales tax, whatever works, can you include the decrease in electric so that the average homeowner might be paying $30 less, but $50 more in water, et cetera, so that we know exactly what that's going to, cost a typical homeowner across the board?
Yeah, we'll definitely definitely have some more detailed impacts and breakdowns.
That decrease might help offset a good chunk of it.
Yep, that's the thought process.
Thank you.
Peter, do you have any concerns about our staff's ability to oversee all the additional work?
Yes, but I think we've been working through this for, like I said, the last 3 years. We do have some consultants that are on board to help us if needed. We're not planning on using them right away, but just in case, we have budgeted for that, so that if our staff can't manage 350 of these, then we can certainly call our consultant friends and say we need help, and they can react really quickly when needed. So we're prepared for it.
Great.
I just want to echo Mayor Hall's comments about the seniors. Maybe that's an option or something that we can just look at as well. So.
And veterans, well, I mentioned veterans. I don't know. Again, I'm just curious.
Well, you got that.
Bill,
he needs his reduction.
Sorry, Bill. I just want to say thank you for this. I understand why you have a one-way door out of your office now.
You have an escape door.
Have to just to go for a walk every now and then. This is an incredible amount everybody put in. I'm very concerned we're hammering our residents. I'm just still very concerned about that, and I know it's nobody's fault, but there's so many things, and I'm going to sound real insensitive here. I don't know about a senior freeze in this, because now we're picking and choosing who gets the benefit or not. And I understand we have a lot of seniors that are living on fixed incomes, things like that, but if the bottom line is we're going to do something like that, then just go to all the residents. I'm sorry to say that, and it might sound insensitive, but we are hammering them. When you look at this alone, and increase here, increase here, increase here, and I know some of this comes from the outside, but sooner or later, when is enough enough? I mean, this is my concern. I don't have the answer to how to fix it, but man, when I look at this, and I just feel like we are completely, totally hammering our residents. And I'm not blaming it. This is just how I feel. I just feel like here's this tax, here's this tax, here's this tax. For years, we fought to pass tax levies, and now it's like, well, here's another. This is getting to a point where I don't know if it can stop, but if somebody keeps coming up to me going, hey, this tax, this tax, this tax, this, I need the statement of what to say, because I don't have the answer of where it stops. And that's going to happen when they see it. When's this going to stop? When the increase is going to stop? Well, we got to do all these projects. So when do they stop? 75 years. I don't know. I mean, that's my, everybody's up here trying to come up with viable solutions, and I'm not saying not, but you want to talk about the tough conversations. Those are them, and especially for some of us that live in kind of different areas where money is extremely tight. And not that doesn't happen in every ward, but it is extremely tight, I know, in our ward. And I do worry about those conversations where it's going to be like, well, hey, this is our best option. And then look at us being like, this is the best you came up with. That's going to be very, very difficult, in my opinion.
And this is the type of conversation that I think we've all been asking for.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
So I mean, and not that it's a point or counterpoint or a response, but I get it. I understand, and I think that we've all been so impressed with what Bill and his staff has done and what everybody's done, because what we've always talked about is what are our options and what does that mean to the overall state of the city. And
right.
We talk about, and we hear about Jamie and others who have talked about. I mean, I met, right, with all 10 council members between Christmas and New Year's, and there were a couple common denominators in all those conversations. This was a common denominator. Every one of us, everybody that talked, had the same sort of concerns, and now that we're seeing it, the reality is that, to your point, we have to figure it out, But I think going back to what Jamie had said, and I know that Jamie said it and articulated it, but we'd all agree, so much of this is communication with our community is to, you know, what's happened. And you can see why every council in the past has kicked it down the road. But the reality is that it's here.
It's here,
So now, how do we do it? How do we make the tough decisions? And then the communication piece. I mean, and again, ideas and thoughts. I mean, you know, I've watched the school district do a wonderful job of having community forums, and that, you know, we have a lot of smart people in this room, but we also, you know, how do we get community buy-in? How do we get them to understand? Do we tap into, you know, past elected leaders? Do we talk to, you know, people who have been up here and try to put together, not to say that these ideas are bad ideas, they're not ideas, but how are we going to get our entire community to understand what you're talking about? But I mean, to me, this is the exact conversation that we've wanted to have for a long time.
Right.
It sounds like one way to reduce the taxes on residents would also be to combine maybe lower taxes with some version of a loan or a bond or something, but that, of course, would ultimately cost more for residents over a longer period of time.
Can I just comment about the senior thing? Mark, that's a great point. I think David mentioned veterans, seniors. I think it should be income-based, really. You know, so if you're a senior and you're making $300,000 a year, maybe they don't really need, you know what I'm saying? So I think if there's somebody on Social Security making $25,000-$30,000, maybe that's something to think about. I don't know. Just maybe it's something we don't do at all. I have no idea.
Well, it's like for your taxes, you can qualify for a freeze, you can qualify for anything, but they're income-based.
It's income-based, correct.
I don't qualify for it.
Right. Ryan, did you have something?
So I just want to be careful because I think I hear what you're saying, you know, Mr. Mayor, but I think if you look at the last 4 years, you know, this body has done a lot of those things. You know, we increased the sales tax based on staff's recommendation. We've met the ask for property tax levy. You know, we passed a grocery tax. We are doing the things, I think, up here, you know, to try and meet these standards. And you can paint this however you want. This is a lot of additional asks that we're coming. I think we have to take a long look in the mirror saying, okay, I'm looking at 5 years of fiscal year, and every single year the pie's getting bigger. We can't touch it. It's impossible. It has to be done. Okay, so why are we so comfortable on the alternative saying at every time council passes the revenue increase? It's not like we've been flat on the property tax levy. The grocery tax went through. So it's more than communication messaging. It really boils down to tough conversations, because if you're going to say, listen, there's nothing operationally that we can touch, it only has to come from residents because, you know, they expect the services. You're going to take a lot more than just communication. This is tough math that you're looking at, whether it's your utilities, whether it's lead pipes, whether it's your debt refinancing, whether it's the cost of doing these services. All these are really tough. But it's not like we haven't touched the property tax levy in the last 4 years. It's not like we haven't looked at these things. We did pass the home rule sales tax. We actually are doing those things over these last 4 years. And what we're saying is it's still not enough. There's got to be some burden sharing here. Then we got to go through some of this stuff and look and go, can you bring me back to the 22, 23 levels of what we were able to function as a city at $50 million? Because I'm going to take that revenue gap, or I hate the word revenue in government, that funding gap, and I'm going to take that, and that's how you're going to pay for your water utility. That's how you're going to pay for lead pipes. Okay, that's going to be some tough conversations between council, department, and staff, and how we're going to make that work. But the idea that somehow we aren't passing, we are doing that every year, you know, and it is back in our system, and we're hammering the people that make St. Charles, St. Charles. I'm just not comfortable going back. I'll be the canary in the coal mine. There's nothing on this sheet I'm comfortable with. Zero. I feel like we've asked our residents and our local businesses a lot. I think you got to start looking at, hey, our last 5 years, let's start with what percentages can you hold, freeze, slow down, and try to dedicate back to all the things that we have to do, because it's the one area that we don't do that. Unless I'm missing those meetings or those conversations, we don't. It's immediately to, here's your funding services, or what are creative things we can do. If you're going to take somebody's utility bill from $200 to $260 in 2 years, and they're X amount of years old, and they're paying the grocery tax and the property tax levy, it becomes a point of, I don't know if that's sustainable.
So it is a difficult conversation, you're right, and part of that is because of things that exist in Illinois that we have to abide by, and some of those costs, their personnel, go up every year because we are a very strong labor state. We can't touch a lot of those things, and when your labor market continues to go up with your unionized individuals, we have a very small gap between our top union paid member and our person that's out of the union. And as soon as that person in the union tops above that next person, they're out the door. So you create a cultural problem where you then don't keep your administrative staff, your director staff, your top level people who are the ones helping to set the policy direction in the city in favor of still having to pay those union wages. And you're not going to cut out a significant portion of it. So you start creating those kind of cultural things that exist when you start going down that path. And you look at something like a utility. I've heard NICOR is going up 40% next year. And I don't think anybody is going to NICOR and saying, fix it, don't do it.
Because they don't have an option, though.
But that's exactly it. Our utility is supposed to operate independently, and it should be self-sustaining. So we've been continuing to subsidize our water fund over the last 3 years because we haven't been having our rates keep pace with our water rates. So we're funneling money in from our general fund. So you want to cut money out of the general fund, there's $3 million off the top I can divert back to the general fund if we raise our utility rates back. So we as staff have been coming up with different ways that we can make this all work together and still keep our core services, because we do not have that much discretion to say find $10 million in the budget. If council has ideas on where that $10 million can come from, I'm all ears, but there is just not that kind of gap in our budget without those mass layoffs.
So honestly, I think I'm not going to use that term, that word there. I'll let you use that. I think in fairness, if you're talking about, everything across the board to maintain service levels, to look at these contractual services to go through, this is one part of the conversation, right? There's a whole nother screen that comes up and says, oh, let's have this conversation about if you're talking about, 1% growth for all these departments or acts, but there has to be, it can't just be that this is automatic, like you're stuck. We just every year have to be at 5, 6, 7% because it's the way that it is, and turn around to the St. Charles resident and say, I need you to give me an extra $100 a year. At some point, people are going to say, I'm done. And then now you've built, budgets and operations trying to keep up for people that are walking out the other door or choose to not move here or not eat here or not come here because, we didn't look at alternative ways of not fun conversations, not easy conversations, but you got to look. I think you have to put everything on the table right now and say, none of this is going to be easy, but to just say we're going to move, home rule sales tax up another 0.5%. Sure, it's 10.6, but that's a big ask, so there's no question in there. There's just a statement.
I mean, it sounds like staff is saying that money isn't available. So do we need to have another meeting? I would be open to that, where we sit and we go through the line items and we look for that. I mean, just to help us feel confident that
I wouldn't want to do that.
So this is part of the divide between council and staff. That's our job to do those operational items, to give you recommendations based on policies. And if the policy directive is keep the budget flat, that's fine. But we know internally there are things that have to happen. There are things that have to be done. I can't cut out. I mentioned it before. Our TRICOM dispatch budget is going up. I have to come up with $40,000 for that and don't have a choice. It's going up more next year. So there isn't. Our budgets do not stay flat, and that's driven by the fact that the state of Illinois is what the state of Illinois is. So our personnel services, our pensions, our health insurance goes up every single year. So just that alone drives our budget numbers up, and we don't have an opportunity to not follow through with those things. And again, certainly we could freeze the non-union staff, but that there's going to be fallout from that too. But aside from that, all of our costs go up every year to do exactly the same thing without adding any other services on. So the pie gets bigger in the money side because the service level requirements get bigger. Sometimes it's mandates from the federal government in the way of body cameras. Sometimes it's utilities and PFAS or lead service lines. But every year we have these mandates that come down, and some of them are very minor and small, but it takes more energy and more money to do exactly the same job we do every year. And I'm not even factoring in inflationary adjustments to that it costs us the same way to buy things that it costs everybody else as well in talking about a $220 million budget. So while we look at it every year very, very intently as a staff in terms of what can we reduce, what aren't we spending, what do we need to spend, we've identified some things that could in theory be cut out that are the extras that we do here, but you're still under $1 million at that mark.
Can I just so we're going to have more meetings, I'm assuming, just to kind of
yes, this was certainly over the next 2 meetings. More is needed in February to kind of think about the different considerations and pros
and
and
when
cons.
you come back and we do additional meetings, you're going to have, I'm assuming, capital projects that you're going to bring forward.
That was originally going to be a topic for tonight, but we bumped it because of all the other things.
That's fine. And I know one of those capital projects that's, I think in this year's budget is this room here. Yeah. And I think it's 1.5 or is it 1.2 million?
It was budgeted at 1.2. The bid came in at 1.
I mean, and I know there's important elements of this that need to be updated, but that to me is a significant dollar amount that could be redirected, perhaps, maybe towards something like this, in my opinion. Like, what is the priority? I would say the infrastructure at this, after looking at this, that's just my 2 cents, is probably the priority. Now, are there some things we can do here that maybe is a little bit more reasonable? Maybe. I don't know. But when I hear that number, I could never support that right now, knowing all of this is going on until we have a solution for this, right? So that's kind of where I'm at with. But that's a big number. So those are the things that I'm looking at with projects. I'm not looking at the little things that you need to operate day to day that you know about. I'm not interested in getting in the weeds.
So I really appreciate that, and I think those are kind of 2 different discussions. So Alderperson Bongard's talking about our general fund budget, and I think what I'm hearing from you is the capital discussion, and that's something that we go over every year. What projects do we want to fund? But as we continue to hold on our general fund and can't funnel money into that capital project fund, that starts to now be unavailable for additional projects.
But this, like for this room, we're going to function whether it gets remodeled or not. For this is just an example. If this is not a pipe underground, it's not infrastructure, it's not an absolute. I'm not opposed to it. If you say, hey, we found this, we have surplus, I'm not opposed to it, but right now it's not the priority for me. But that's where I'm at. So I'm not, and that money, maybe that can go towards the $4 or $5 million that you're looking for to get started with the lead pipe program or something. I don't know, but that's where I'm at with that.
I personally don't want to stop all improvements to St. Charles in order to put every single dollar into the lead service pipe. I mean, I'd rather extend it, finance it, figure out a way to continue to maintain our standard of quality of living in St. Charles and our buildings and our roads to a reasonable extent. And while we figure, I think, these increases are temporary, fortunately. I wouldn't want to stop everything in order to fund lead pipes for 10 years.
I'm just I'll agree with you as well. Unfortunately, I don't agree. You mentioned going line by line. I don't want to do that.
I don't want to do that. I want to make sure my colleagues are comfortable that we're going to live within the land use staff recommendations versus go back to general fund, because it feels like we're not even aligned to that. But we are.
But just in case staff, Heather, I don't want you to burst into flames.
I don't want.
We don't want to go line by line.
Bill,
I withdraw my suggestion.
I'm sorry. I was just going to say one more time that, I want to say it was 10 years ago, give or take, that the electric fund was in a similar position, and it wasn't like we raised rates just to raise rates. We raised rates so that the fund would take care of itself, and now we're in that same situation with water, so we have to figure out a way to make sure what we're charging the residents pays for or more than what the rates are being charged to us.
Okay, are there any other comments? Okay, Bill?
I believe there's only one other wrap-up slide.
We were right there.
Like I said, we do have some additional discussion scheduled. We'll follow up on the discussion items for tonight. General capital project review, I mentioned that was something we started to get together for tonight, but it'll be for next time. Revenue, other budget items, personnel, compensation, and then operating budget discussion for next year. So no specific dates for some of those topics, but just kind of wanted to lay out what's on the radar in addition to follow-up from tonight. So thank you for all the time and listening.
Yeah.
Well done,
you.
well done.
Thank you.
Can we get a
for all the
copy of
comments.
everything?
Absolutely. Tonight I can
Yeah.
send it out.
Thank you.
Great, thank you, Bill, and
Not only
everybody else.
that,
Oh.
So, all right, so, any other comments here? All right, public comment?
I know you guys have been here a long time. I'll give you a minute.
Mr. Loeffler, is public comment?
I don't know how to. It's all yours.
Looks to me like you guys need 20 million a year. Between the lead lines, the sewer, the water, you're coming up way short. And you should be looking at every possible place to increase. And Ryan, to your point, wherever we can cut $1 million here, $1 million there, $1 million in this room. Maybe we're not going to be getting the, the fancy parking stuff in the parking garage. Maybe we should have thought and waited on Prairie Street and let our residents burn their stocks out a little sooner. Maybe we should think about a $5 per tire user impact fee. Maybe we should think about a bag tax. We should look at every possible way to come up with some money. I'd rather pay for it now and not as, what was it, $170 million it turned into? Or if we spread it out over 20 years, that seems crazy. Let's pay for it now. Let's not put it on the future generations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Loeffler.
Thank you, Steve.
Any other public comment? All right, any additional items from council or staff? Okay, do we have a motion to adjourn?
Weber will move.
Second.
All right, Weber motion, Warble second, roll call?
Kulturitis?
Yes.
Folks?
Yes.
Bongard?
Yes.
Munn?
Yes.
Kim?
Yes.
Spellman?
Yes.
Petrola?
Yes.
Wirbel?
Yes.
Lesnar?
Yes.
Weber?
Yes.
All right, John, thanks for being here as well.
Thank you, John.